And you got two choices, girl. Sign the papers tonight, or by Monday morning, this garage won't exist anymore. Earned. Lily Carter looked at the man in the expensive suit standing in her grandfather's garage, the place she had bled for, cried for, fought for every single night for 8 months, and she said the only thing she could think of: get out. She was 19 years old. She had $37 in her bank account. She had a flashlight, a wrench, and a name she refused to let die. And that night, a dying motorcycle changed everything. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The night Lily Carter almost lost, everything started the same way most of her nights started: alone, cold and covered in grease. It was February. The kind of February that doesn't apologize for itself. The kind where the wind slips through every crack in the walls and reminds you that the building you're standing in was never meant to survive this long. Lily had known for months that the garage was falling apart around her. She knew it the way you know a wound is infected, not because you want to see it, but because you can feel it getting worse no matter how much you try to ignore it. She was underneath a 1987 Chevy pickup truck that belonged to a retired school bus driver named Gerald Hutchins. Gerald, 72 years old, drove 12 miles each way to get his truck to her garage and paid her in cash every single time. He was one of 4 customers she had left. 4. 8 months ago, when her grandfather Earl Carter passed away in his sleep with his reading glasses still on his nose and a cup of coffee gone cold on the nightstand beside him, this garage had 12 regular customers, a part-time assistant named Ronnie who came in on Saturdays, and a small but steady reputation built across 31 years of honest work. Now it had 4 customers, no assistant, no electricity in the back half of the building because she couldn't afford to fix the wiring, and a debt notice from Hargrove Financial Solutions that she had folded into quarters and tucked underneath a socket wrench on the workbench because she couldn't stand looking at it. The number on that notice was $47,000. She was 19 years old. Her flashlight flickered. She slapped the side of it twice with her palm, the way her grandfather had taught her. Give it some attitude, Lilybug. Things that get stuck just need to remember they still work. And the beam steadied. She went back to the oil gasket she was replacing, her fingers moving from memory, her mind doing the math she'd already done 100 times that week. If Gerald paid what he owed for the truck, she had enough to cover the electric bill for 1 more month. If the woman over on Sycamore Street actually brought in the Pontiac she'd been promising to bring in for 6 weeks, she might be able to cover the water. If she skipped buying groceries again this week and survived on the peanut butter and crackers in the back cabinet, she could put $40 toward the insurance premium that was already 3 weeks late. None of it was enough. She knew that. The math didn't work no matter how many different ways she arranged the numbers. But she kept doing it anyway, the same way she kept coming in every night, the same way she kept the lights on in the front of the garage, even when it meant sitting in the dark in the back, because quitting wasn't something Earl Carter's granddaughter did. You come from stubborn people, Lilybug. It ain't always pretty, but it keeps you alive. She had heard his voice so many times in the last 8 months that she'd stopped being surprised by it. It arrived in the quiet moments when she was elbow deep in someone's engine, or sitting on the floor eating crackers for the 3rd night in a row, or lying awake at 2 in the morning listening to the building settle around her like an old man finding a comfortable chair. She missed him in a way that didn't have a proper name. Not grief, exactly. Grief was what happened at the beginning, the first few weeks when the shock of it hadn't worn off, and people still brought casseroles and said things like he lived a full life and he was so proud of you. What she felt now was something older than grief, something more stubborn. A kind of ache that had just decided to move in permanently and had stopped bothering to explain itself. She heard the motorcycle before she saw it. She heard it the way you hear a storm coming, not the thunder, not the rain, but that specific change in the air pressure, that low vibration in the ground that tells your body something large is moving in your direction. The engine was wrong. Even from half a mile away, even muffled through the garage walls. She could hear it, a Harley-Davidson V-twin with something catastrophically wrong in the lower end. A knock that wasn't just a knock. A sound like something broken, trying to hold itself together long enough to get somewhere safe. She slid out from under Gerald's truck. She stood up, wiping her hands on the rag she kept tucked in her back pocket, and she listened. The motorcycle was slowing down. Or not slowing down exactly. Losing the ability to go faster. There was a difference. And Lily knew the difference the same way she knew the difference between an engine that was cooling and an engine that was dying. This engine was dying. She walked to the front of the garage. Through the smeared glass of the front window, she could see headlights, one headlight, actually, cutting an unsteady line through the dark of Route 9, and she could see the motorcycle weaving. Not from recklessness, from necessity. Whatever was wrong with it had spread to the handling, and the rider was fighting the bike the way you fight something that's decided it doesn't want to cooperate anymore. She pushed open the garage door. The night air hit her face like a slap. The motorcycle was maybe 100 yards out now, and she could hear the engine, clearly a sound that made her teeth hurt. The sound of metal grinding against metal in places. Metal is absolutely not supposed to be grinding. The rider was holding it together through sheer force of will. She could see that, the way his body was leaning into it, compensating, demanding the machine give him 40 more yards, 2010. The Harley gave out 30 feet from her garage door. It didn't fall dramatically. It didn't skid or spin. It simply ran out of the ability to continue, the engine seizing with a sound like a gunshot, and the forward momentum carried it another few feet before it listed hard to the right and went down. The rider went with it. Lily was already moving. She crossed the distance between the garage door and the fallen motorcycle in seconds, her flashlight beam bouncing across the pavement. The man on the ground was large, the kind of large that registered even when he was horizontal, and tangled up with 600 pounds of motorcycle. He was wearing a leather vest over a dark jacket, and even as he was pushing himself up off the ground, she could see the red spreading through the fabric of his jacket sleeve. Hey, she was crouching beside him before she'd made the conscious decision to crouch. Hey, don't just wait a second, you went down hard. I'm fine. His voice was gravel and smoke, the kind of voice that had said, I'm fine, approximately 10,000 times in situations where it was very much not fine. He was already trying to get his leg out from under the motorcycle, and he was doing it with his left arm, which meant his right arm wasn't working the way it was supposed to. I said, I'm fine. He got his leg free. He sat up. He looked at her with eyes that were simultaneously sharp as glass and exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with tonight. He was older, somewhere in his early 50s, she guessed, with the kind of weathered face that told you he had spent a significant portion of his life outside, in conditions that had opinions about him. His jaw was set. His right hand was pressed to his side. My bike? Your bike is down. It's not going anywhere. She shined the flashlight on his arm. The cut was on his forearm through the jacket, and it was bleeding steadily, but not the way things bleed when they've hit something truly important. You're bleeding, I noticed. Can you walk? I can do whatever I need to do. He looked at the motorcycle, and something moved across his face, something she didn't have a word for yet, but that she would later recognize as the expression a person makes when they see something that matters to them in a condition they weren't prepared for. How bad is it? Lily shined her flashlight on the fallen Harley. It was a heritage Softail, and she could see that much an older one. Well-maintained from the look of what wasn't currently crumpled or scraped, which meant whoever owned it cared about it the way some people cared about a living thing. She walked around it slowly, the light moving across the frame, the engine, the wheels. The engine seized, she said. That's obvious. Something in the lower end let go. We'll know more when I can get it up on the lift. The right foot peg is gone. The exhaust pipe is bent, and she stopped. She moved the light back to the rear brake assembly, and she looked at it for a long moment. What? Nothing yet, she stood up. Can you get to the door? I'll come back for the bike. He looked at her like she had said something amusing. You're going to bring the bike in? It's February, and it's going to rain in about an hour. If you wanted to sit out here, that's your call. She looked back at him. Turned. Can you walk or not? A pause. Something shifted in his expression, not warmth exactly, but the recognition of something he hadn't expected to find. Turned. Yeah, I can walk. He walked. She helped him through the garage door without making it look like she was helping him, which she understood instinctively was the only kind of help he was capable of accepting. Turned. She cleared a space on the bench near the front, and he sat down without being told to, pressing the old rag she handed him against his arm. Turned. You got a name? She asked, already heading back out to the motorcycle. Turned. Bear, she stopped, looked back at him. Bear. Turned. Jackson Walker. But everyone calls me Bear. He said it without apology or explanation, the way people say their names when their names are simply facts about them rather than things they've decided. Turned. Lily Carter. She went back out into the cold. Turned. It took her 10 minutes and everything she had to get the Harley upright and walking it on its rear wheel through the garage door. It was heavy the way things that are built to last are heavy, and it was unwieldy with the damage it had taken. But she got it inside, and she got it onto the lift, and she got the lift under it before she let herself breathe. When she looked back at the man on her bench, he was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. You always work alone, he asked. Usually. He glanced somewhere for a clock and didn't find one. What time is it? 11:40, she said. Ish. At almost midnight. Alone. Is that a question? More of an observation. Okay. She pulled on her work gloves and reached for her light. You want me to look at your bike or not? He looked at her for another moment. Then he said, yeah, I want you to look at the bike. She looked at the bike. She started with the engine because that was the emergency. You always treat the emergency first. Her grandfather had said, figure out what's trying to kill the patient and stop that before you worry about anything else. The lower end had given up catastrophically. She could see that within the first 5 minutes. The primary chain tensioner had failed, which had caused the chain to skip, which had caused the kind of cascading damage that made her jaw tighten just looking at it. This wasn't wear and tear. This wasn't the gradual failure of old parts. Everything in that lower end had been maintained carefully. Recently, consistently, she could see it in the condition of the parts that hadn't been damaged in the failure. Someone had cared for this engine, which meant the failure was specific. When did you have this serviced last? She asked, not looking up from the engine. 3 weeks ago, he paused. My guy does it every 3 months. Has for 6 years, your guy. He's a mechanic? He's my mechanic. Did he do the brakes at the same time? Another pause. A longer one. Yeah, full service. Why? Lily moved her flashlight to the rear brake assembly again. She looked at it for a long, careful moment. She looked at the brake line. She looked at the way the brake line connected to the caliper. She looked at the small, precise mark on the fitting that she had noticed the first time and hadn't said anything about because she needed to be sure before she said anything about something like this. She was sure. She straightened up slowly. Mr. Walker, she said, and something in her voice made him sit up straighter. I need you to tell me something honestly. Go ahead. Did anyone have access to this motorcycle in the last few days? Anyone you didn't put there yourself? The silence that followed was the kind of silence that changes rooms. She could feel him processing the question, feel him understanding what she wasn't saying yet, feel the quality of the air shift between them. What are you seeing, he said. His voice was very quiet. The brake line on your rear assembly has a score mark on the fitting, she said. Not a stress fracture, not wear. A score mark like something was used to partially cut through the metal at a specific point. Not enough to fail immediately. Enough to fail. She searched for the words when you got up to speed and held it there for a while. On a highway. At night, he said nothing. The tensioner failure that seized your engine, I'm not certain yet, but the placement of the damage is consistent with interference. Something introduced to the system rather than something that just gave out. She looked at him steadily. Mr. Walker, I don't want to alarm you without being sure. But I think you should consider the possibility that someone tampered with this motorcycle. Jackson Bear Walker looked at her across the garage floor. He looked at her the way a man looks at something when he's deciding how much of the truth to let himself see. Then he said very quietly, "How old are you?" 19. Earned. And you can tell all of that from, he gestured toward the bike. Earned, my grandfather taught me. He was a mechanic for 30 years before he built this shop. She kept her voice even. Earned. I'm not wrong about the score mark. You can look at it yourself. Earned. He stood up. He walked to the bike steadily. She noticed whatever pain he was in held at a distance by some she recognized as discipline, and he crouched down and looked at exactly where her light was pointing. And he looked at it for a long time. When he stood up, his face had changed. And who knows you're out here tonight? Lily asked. He looked at her sharply. And what? You came in on Route 9, that's the highway. And if the brake line was scored to fail at speed, that means someone expected you to be on the highway. And if someone expected you to be on the highway tonight, they might know roughly where you were coming from and where you were going. She held his gaze. And I'm asking, who knows your route? The muscles in his jaw worked. And a lot of people. People you trust? People I thought I trusted. He said it like he was hearing himself say it for the first time. And like the words had a weight he hadn't expected them to have. And Lily said nothing. She turned back to the bike and started making a mental inventory of what needed to be done. And the engine damage was substantial. She was going to need parts she didn't have on hand. And that meant either she called around in the morning or whoever Bear called was going to have to source them. And the brake system she could make safe tonight if she had the right line and fitting, and she thought she did. She thought she had seen the right diameter stock in the back cabinet near the rear wall. And I can make the brakes safe tonight, she said. The engine is going to take longer. And I need to know what parts you want me to source and whether you're paying for them up front or, and I'll pay for everything. His voice was still quiet. And whatever you need tonight. She looked at him. You carry cash? And he reached into an inside pocket of his leather vest and set a folded roll of bills on her workbench without counting it. And she looked at it. She looked at him. How much is your labor? He asked. And I hadn't thought about it. Think about it now. And she named a number, a fair number. Her grandfather's number, the kind of number that didn't try to take advantage of someone in a bad situation. And he took the roll back, counted out twice that amount, and set it on the bench. And for the inconvenience of the hour, he said. She stared at the money. And she thought about the Hargrove financial notice folded under the socket wrench. And she thought about the electric bill and the insurance premium and the 4 customers. And I need to make a phone call, he said. Go ahead. And he stepped toward the front of the garage, and she heard him talking in a low voice, the words indistinct, the tone carrying. And she went to the back cabinet and started looking for brake line stock, and her hands moving through the familiar organized chaos of parts and fittings that her grandfather had arranged in a system that made sense to nobody else on earth, but that she had lived with for long enough that her hands knew where to find things before her mind caught up. And she found the fittings she needed. She came back to the bike, and she started work. Behind her, she heard Bear end his call, and she heard him sit back down on the bench. She heard him, after a long silence, say something she hadn't expected. And what's your grandfather's name? She paused, set the fitting down carefully. Earl Carter. He passed 8 months ago, a pause. And I'm sorry. She picked the fitting back up. Yeah. And he taught you all of this, everything I know. Then he was a good man. And she worked in silence for a moment. Then, without looking up, he was the best man I've ever known. And the night deepened around them. And the rain started, and tapping against the garage roof the way she'd known it, which she'd always been good at weather. And another thing Earl had taught her, and you pay attention to the sky, and the sky will pay attention to you, and Lilybug. And she worked steadily while Bear sat on the bench and watched her and said nothing, and she understood instinctively that this was a man who was processing something enormous and needed the space of the noise of her work to do it. And she was an hour into the brake line replacement when he spoke again. And the people who did this, he said, they're going to expect me to be dead. And Lily didn't look up from the fitting she was tightening. And okay, when they find out I'm not, he stopped. And they're going to know the bike got fixed somewhere, she said. And they're going to know it wasn't too far from wherever you went down because you couldn't have walked far. She torqued the fitting to spec and moved to the next one. And is that what you're thinking? Yeah. So the question is whether they're the kind of people who would come looking And they are. No hesitation. She stopped. She looked at him. Then you probably shouldn't have called whoever you just called using a phone that can be tracked. And he looked at her. I used a burner. Okay, she went back to work. Then we've got a little time. She turned the flashlight to the next section of brake line, checking the full run for any other compromise. And are the people coming here going to be on your side or their side? And a long silence. Mine. Definitely mine. How sure is definitely? Sure enough to bet my life on it, which I apparently already have. She checked the last of the brake line. Clean. Whatever had been done had been precise, targeted, intended to look like a single point of failure. Whoever had done this knew what they were doing, knew enough about motorcycle mechanics to know exactly which point of failure would be most likely to kill someone on a highway at speed, without looking like anything other than mechanical failure. That knowledge bothered her more than the act itself. What do you do? She asked. I mean, what's your actual profession? He was quiet for a moment. Transportation business. That's not an answer. No, he agreed, it's not. He looked at his hand. I'm the road captain for a chapter of Hell's Angels. That's my actual profession. I coordinate routes, I manage logistics for the chapter, and I keep people safe when they're moving. She had heard of the Hell's Angels. Everyone had heard of the Hell's Angels. She looked at the vest he was wearing again, at the patches she'd noticed but hadn't processed, and she placed them properly now. Someone tried to kill the road captain, she said. Someone tried to kill me. Yeah. Someone who knew your route well enough to know when your brakes would give. Someone who knew I'd be on Route 9 tonight. Someone who knew my service schedule. He stopped. Someone I trusted enough to know those things. The weight of that sentence sat in the air between them. Lily set down her tool. She looked at him. I'm sorry, she said. That kind of thing, when it comes from someone you trusted, it's different than just danger. It's different than just a threat. He looked at her with an expression she wouldn't fully understand until much later, an expression that combined surprise with something rawer, the look of a man who hadn't expected to be understood by a 19-year-old mechanic in a garage with one working light and a rain-soaked roof. Yeah, he said, it is different. She picked up her tool again. I need another hour on the engine inspection. I can't fix the lower end tonight, I need parts. But I can tell you exactly what I'm looking at and what the plan is. She glanced at him. You doing okay? My arm stopped bleeding, he said. That's not what I asked. Another pause. Smaller this time. I'm doing what I need to do. Okay. She turned back to the engine. Then let's both keep doing that. The hours moved the way hours move when work is happening, and everything outside the work is too large to look at directly. The rain steadied on the roof. Her flashlight didn't flicker again. She called out findings as she went, not explaining, just reporting, the way she would have reported to her grandfather, and Bear listened and asked questions that told her, quietly and without announcement, that he knew more about these machines than most people would have given him credit for. At 2:17 in the morning, headlights swept across the front of the garage. Lily went still. Bear was on his feet instantly, the speed of it startling. All that controlled stillness releasing into sudden readiness, and he was at the window in 3 strides, looking out. He exhaled. My brothers, he said. She joined him at the window. 3 motorcycles had pulled into the lot, their riders shutting engines with the quiet efficiency of people who had long practice in arriving without attracting attention. Even in the February dark, she could make out the silhouettes, 3 men older, all of them wearing the same style of vest. They'll want to come in, Bear said. He looked at her. Is that okay with you? She looked at the 3 men outside. She looked at the garage around her. She thought about the Hargrove financial notice under the socket wrench. It's a garage, she said. People come here when they need help. That's what it's for. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he went to the door. What happened next was the beginning of something none of them could have named, yet something that would take months to unfold and would change the course of 3 lives in ways that couldn't be predicted from this angle. From this cold February night, from this broken motorcycle and this borrowed flashlight and this 19-year-old girl who had refused to close the door. But before any of that could happen, Before any of what came next could be set in motion, one of the men who walked through her garage door looked at the brake line she had replaced and said four words that made the temperature of the room change completely. Bear, look at this. And when Bear walked over and looked at what the man was pointing to, not the rear assembly, not the place she had already found, but the front brake system, the one she hadn't gotten to yet, his face went through something she had never seen on a human face before, because there was a second score mark. Same tool, same technique, same precision. Someone had planned to make absolutely certain there was no survival. The rear brake was the obvious failure point. The front brake was the guarantee. 2 points of failure, both designed to look like they could have been mechanical. The rear failing first would cause a wobble, attempting to compensate by using the front brake on a bike that was already destabilized, which any experienced rider would instinctively do, would have completed the job. It hadn't worked, because Bear had felt something wrong in the handling before the rear brake had given out completely. Because he'd been riding long enough to know, in his body before his mind caught up, that the bike was wrong. Because he'd pushed it off the highway before he'd gotten to speed. Because he'd gotten lucky in exactly the right direction to end up 30 feet from a garage with a girl inside who knew what score marks meant. Bear looked at the front brake assembly for a long time. Then he looked at Lily. "How did you know to check?" he asked. "How did you know it wasn't just the engine?" She thought about that. She thought about Earl, and about the way he had taught her to see, not just to look, but to see, to ask the engine what it wanted to tell you, rather than just looking for what you expected to find. Because the engine failure was too clean, she said. It was catastrophic, but it was contained. It happened in one specific system in one specific way. Real mechanical failure spreads messier than that. This felt like something that was meant to look like failure, but was actually meant to succeed. Bear stared at her. One of the men who had come in with him, a heavy-set man with gray in his beard who had been introduced as Duke, let out a long, slow breath. "Lord Almighty," he said. "Yeah," said another man. Younger than the others, dark eyes, who had been introduced as Remy. "Yeah, that's exactly what it is." The last man, tall, quiet, silver-haired, who Bear had called Frank, was still looking at the brake assembly without speaking. His face was doing something complicated. Lily didn't push it. "I need to ask you something," Bear said to her. He wasn't looking at the bike anymore. He was looking at her. "And I need you to be honest with me." "Okay. When you found the first score mark, why didn't you just call the police?" She held his gaze. "Because it's 11:40 on a February night, and you were bleeding on my floor and you needed help. Police come after the fact. I was here right now." "That's the only reason?" She thought about it honestly. "And because my grandfather always said, you look at what someone needs, not at what they're wearing." The four men looked at each other. Something passed between them, wordless. The kind of communication that happens between people who have spent enough years in each other's company that language has become optional. Then Frank, who had been silent this whole time, turned to look at Lily directly for the first time. His eyes were pale gray, the kind of eyes that had seen a significant amount of the world and had made their peace with most of it. "Miss Carter," he said. His voice was unhurried. "How much trouble are you in?" Lily blinked. "Excuse me, this garage." He looked around it with an expression of calm assessment. "The debt on it, the condition of it. How much trouble are you actually in?" She felt something in her chest, a tightening, a familiar defensiveness, the instinct to say, "I'm fine." "It's fine." "I'm handling it the way you say those things when they're not true, but saying them is the only way you know how to stay standing." She looked at the money on the workbench. She looked at the Hargrove financial notice under the socket wrench. She looked at this man with the pale gray eyes who had walked into her garage at 2 in the morning and asked her a direct question. She told him the truth. $47,000, she said. And a bank that's been pressuring me to sell for 8 months. And a company called Hargrove Financial Solutions that I'm starting to think isn't really a financial company. She stopped. She looked at Frank steadily. "Why are you asking?" Frank looked at Bear. Bear looked back at Frank. because Hargrove Financial Solutions, Frank said, slowly and carefully, is a name we have heard before. The rain came down on the roof of Earl Carter's garage. The flashlight held steady. Lily stood in the middle of the floor her grandfather had built, surrounded by men she had not known existed 3 hours ago, holding a set of information that was starting to rearrange itself in her head into a shape she didn't quite have the words for yet. "Tell me," she said, and they did. Frank didn't sit down when he talked. He stood near the workbench with his arms crossed and his weight balanced the way men stand when they've spent a long time in situations where sitting down meant you weren't ready for what came next. He spoke quietly, without drama, the way people speak when the thing they're saying is dramatic enough on its own that it doesn't need any help. Hargrove Financial Solutions showed up in our territory about 14 months ago, he said. Not announcing themselves, not making noise, just appearing. The way rot appears in wood. You don't see it happening. You just notice one day that something that used to be solid isn't solid anymore. Lily stood with her arms at her sides and listened. They go after small businesses, Frank continued. Specifically small businesses that are already struggling. They offer short-term loans with terms that sound reasonable until you read the fine print. And most people who need money badly enough to take it from someone like Hargrove aren't in a position to spend 3 days with a lawyer going over fine print. He looked at Lily steadily. They took out a diner on Route 6 in 8 weeks. Took out a hardware store in Millfield. Took out a machine shop over in Crestwood that had been in the same family for 22 years. They tried to take out a mechanic's garage, Lily said. They're trying, Frank said. Past tense isn't accurate yet. She absorbed that. What's the connection to what happened to Bear's motorcycle? Duke, who had been leaning against the wall with his thick arms folded, shifted his weight. That's the part that's been keeping us up at night, he said. Duke had a way of speaking that was slow and considered, each word placed with the care of someone who had learned at some point in his life that words said wrong could have serious consequences. We've been watching Hargrove for a few months. They've got connections to people who don't like attention on them. People who have been using the club as a target, I guess you'd say. If the club gets connected to violence, if the club gets connected to anything that brings law enforcement pressure, it's good for the people Hargrove works with. It clears the field. So somebody tried to kill Bear, Lily said, to create a problem for the Hells Angels. And to take out the man who's been doing most of the watching, Bear said from where he was standing near the door. He'd been quiet since Frank started talking, the kind of quiet that wasn't absence but concentration. I've been the one tracking Hargrove's movements. If I'm gone and if the circumstances look suspicious enough to bring heat down on the chapter. He stopped. Let the silence complete the sentence. Remy, who had barely said 10 words since he'd walked in, said quietly, someone in our circle told them about the route. Someone told them about the service schedule. The room went still. It was the thing none of them had said directly yet, and hearing it out loud did something to the air. Lily watched Bear's face and saw something move through it, not pain exactly, but the cousin of pain, the thing that lives next door to pain and borrows its tools. I know, Bear said. Bear, I know, Remy. I've known since I saw the brake line. His jaw tightened. Let's not make it a whole discussion right now. We deal with what's in front of us. Remy looked at Frank. Frank gave the smallest possible nod. Duke looked at his hands. Lily understood. In that moment, that she was watching a group of people manage something that was simultaneously a crisis and a grief, the specific grief of betrayal, which is different from every other kind because it retroactively contaminates things that were good. It reaches backward in time and rewrites memories. It makes you wonder what else was a lie, how far back the lie goes, whether the warmth you felt in certain moments was real or performed. She knew that grief. She had felt a smaller version of it in the weeks after her grandfather died, when she'd started opening the garage's financial records and understood that the situation was worse than anyone had told her, that Earl had known for months how bad it was and had chosen to protect her from it rather than prepare her, and she'd had to grieve him and grieve the decision he'd made at the same time. I want to ask you something, she said. She was looking at Bear. And I want you to answer me honestly the way I answered you. And he met her eyes. Go ahead. The person who did this, who gave them your route, your schedule. And do you know who it is? A pause that went on long enough to become its own answer. And I have a strong suspicion. Strong enough to be sure? And no. The word was precise. Strong enough to be something I'm not willing to act on until I'm sure. And which is the only kind of man I know how to be. She nodded. And she respected that. She turned back to the bike because the bike was something she could do something about right now, and right now that mattered. And I can have the brake systems fully secured tonight, she said. And both front and rear. I'll do a full line inspection, replace both assemblies, and make sure nothing else has been touched that I haven't seen yet. She was already moving toward the cabinet where she'd found the first fitting. And the engine is a different situation. I need a primary chain tensioner, new primary chain, and I need to look at the flywheel before I can tell you if there's any further damage to the lower end. I don't have those parts here. Tell me what you need, Bear said. And I'll have them here by morning. And she pulled out a notepad, a small, spiral-bound one her grandfather had used for parts lists, still half full of his handwriting, which she had not been able to bring herself to tear out, and she wrote down the specifications. She wrote them clearly and precisely, the way Earl had taught her, because a parts list written unclear was a parts list that came back wrong, and wrong parts were time wasted, and time wasted was money lost. She tore off the sheet and handed it to Bear. He looked at it. Then he looked at her handwriting. Then he looked up at her with an expression that she couldn't quite categorize. You want to tell me something? She asked. No, he said. He stopped. Your grandfather teach you this, too? The precision? He said a mechanic who doesn't write it down is a mechanic who's already planning to fail. Bear folded the paper and put it in his vest pocket. He took out a phone, not the one he'd made the call on earlier, a different one, and stepped toward the door. I'll wake some people up, he said. While you do that, Lily said, already kneeling beside the front brake assembly, someone want to explain to me how Hargrove Financial Solutions is connected to whoever tried to kill your road captain. Because you said you'd tell me, and you started, but you didn't finish. Frank sat down. For the first time since he'd arrived, he actually sat down on the bench, with the careful movement of a man whose joints had been through a lot of winters. 14 months ago, he said, a man named Garrett Pruitt moved into this county. He came in quiet the way I said, nobody special, nobody you'd notice. He set up Hargrove Financial Solutions out of an office building in Crestwood. Clean operation on the surface, LLC, proper filings, a website with professional photographs of people in suits who do not actually work there. He paused. Garrett Pruitt has a history, not a criminal history, nothing you'd find if you ran his name through official channels, but a history with people who have criminal histories. He's what you'd call a facilitator. He finds legitimate-looking mechanisms to extract money and property from people who are too small to fight back. And the money and property goes somewhere that has nothing to do with the name on the office door. Where does it go? Lily asked without looking up from the brake assembly. And that's what Bear was trying to find out. She paused. She looked up. 6 months, Frank said. He's been tracking the flow of it for 6 months. Quietly, carefully, because we have people in this county who use small businesses, use garages and diners and hardware stores, and when those places disappear, people we care about have less cover, less stability. He held her gaze, and because what Pruitt's doing is wrong, not illegal in a way that's easy to prove, but wrong. Lily went back to the brake assembly. Her hands were steady, and her mind was not. My grandfather took a loan from a company called Hargrove Financial Solutions 4 months before he died, she said. It was the first time she had said it out loud to anyone. I found the paperwork in his files 3 weeks after the funeral. He'd taken the loan to cover a gap in income, 3 big clients left in the same month. I don't know why. I've never been able to figure out why. He took the loan and he didn't tell me. She kept her voice level. The terms he got weren't what the initial agreement said. There were fees written in the language of the fine print that added 30% to the outstanding balance by the end of month 1. By month 3, the interest structure, the balance was essentially permanent. You couldn't pay it down because the interest accrued faster than any reasonable payment schedule could address it. The garage was very quiet. He died not knowing if I'd be okay, she said. And he died worrying about this place. She set down the tool she was holding and picked up the next one. So when you say Hargrove Financial Solutions is a name you've heard, before I need you to understand that it is not abstract information to me. Duke made a sound low in his throat. Remy looked at the floor. Frank looked at Lily with those pale gray eyes for a long moment. We understand, Frank said. We understand it completely. Good. She went back to work. Then let's be very clear about something. Whatever you're working on, whatever you've been tracking, if it connects to Hargrove, I want to know. Not because I'm asking to be involved in your business. Because that company destroyed my grandfather's peace of mind in the last months of his life. And they are trying to take the one thing he spent 30 years building, and I want to know the full shape of what I'm fighting. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Duke said quietly, yeah, you should know. And he told her. Garrett Pruitt, it turned out, was not operating alone and was not operating on a small scale. The mechanism was elegant in the way that genuinely cruel things sometimes are elegant because it required no violence, no obvious crime, nothing that left marks. He targeted small businesses with a specific profile, family-owned, in moderate financial stress, with some kind of legacy attachment that made the owners reluctant to sell. He offered loans with predatory terms hidden in dense language. When the businesses inevitably failed to keep up with the payment structure, Hargrove exercised the default clauses that in several cases gave the company the right, not only to the repayment of the loan, but to assets including the property itself. In some cases, those properties had then been sold. In other cases, and this was the part that had taken Bear 6 months to untangle, the properties had been transferred to a holding company with no visible connection to Hargrove, and then transferred again to a development corporation that was very quietly accumulating land along a specific corridor in the county. A corridor? Duke said, that happened to run directly along the proposed route of a new highway extension that had been in county planning documents for 2 years, and that, when completed, would make the land along that corridor worth substantially more than it was currently worth. Lily's hands stopped moving. She thought about her grandfather's garage. She thought about where it sat on Route 9, 2 miles from the intersection that the highway extension was projected to pass through. She thought about the 3 big clients who had left in the same month, 4 months before Earl died. And she thought about whether clients left on their own or whether clients sometimes got a phone call they didn't talk about afterward. They ran his clients off, she said. Didn't they? Someone made calls to his biggest clients, told them something, convinced them to go somewhere else, made his income drop enough that he needed to borrow money. From them, the silence was its own answer. He didn't fail, she said. The words were coming out slowly, like something being excavated. He didn't fail. They manufactured the failure. They made him need them, and then they made sure the thing he took from them would never be paid off. She was on her feet. She hadn't decided to stand a body, had made that decision without consulting her. She was standing in the middle of the garage floor, with her hands at her sides, and the wrench still in her right hand. And she was looking at Frank with an expression that she had no way of seeing, but that Duke would describe later. To the other men, as the look of someone who has just understood something and is deciding what to do with the understanding. Is that what happened? She asked Frank directly. Is that your theory, or is that something you know? Frank held her gaze. It's more than theory, he said carefully. We have documentation of a similar pattern in 2 other cases in the county. We don't have a direct connection to your grandfather's situation yet, but the pattern is, he stopped. Identical, Remy said. He hadn't spoken in a while and the word landed hard. Yeah, Frank said. Identical. Bear came back through the door. His phone conversation ended. He read the room immediately, the way experienced people read rooms, by the quality of the silence rather than anything visible, and he looked at Lily. Parts will be here by 6, he said. I woke up a man in Crestwood who owes me a significant favor. He paused. Earned. You okay? I'm better than I was an hour ago, she said. Earned. Which is a strange thing to say, but it's true. She went back to the brake assembly. Earned. I'm going to need about another hour on the front brake and 45 minutes on the rear. Earned. Then I want to do a full inspection of everything else, cables, lines, all of it, because at this point I'm not willing to assume anything on this bike is what it looks like. Agreed, Bear said. While I do that, I want to hear everything. Earned. All of it, everything you found on Pruitt and Hargrove. Earned. Not the summary, the whole thing. Bear looked at Frank. Earned. Frank looked back at Bear. Something passed between them. Earned. All of it? Bear said. All of it, she said. You want your bike fixed correctly. You want to know what's wrong with it. You don't just want me to patch the obvious damage and send you back out there. Earned. You want me to understand the whole system. She looked up from the brake assembly for just a moment, just long enough to make the point. Earned. That's the same thing. Bear sat down on the bench. Earned. And he told her all of it. It took most of the next hour. Earned. He talked while she worked. Earned. His voice steady and methodical. Earned. Laying out 6 months of patient observation, the properties that had changed hands. Earned. The businesses that had failed. Earned. The names that appeared in the financial records he'd managed to obtain through means he did not specify and she did not ask about. The shell company structure that connected Hargrove Financial to the Development Corporation. Earned. The county planning official whose signature appeared on documents it probably shouldn't have appeared on. The lawyer who had drafted debt agreements in language specifically designed to be incomprehensible to anyone without a legal background. Earned. She listened the way she worked thoroughly, without interruption, storing everything. Earned. At 3:45 in the morning, she completed the full brake inspection and began the cable check. Earned. The cables were clean. Whatever had been done to the motorcycle had been targeted and efficient. Whoever had done it, known exactly which systems to compromise and had not touched anything else. Earned. Which told her something about their technical knowledge and also something about their psychology. They were not vandals. They were engineers of a specific outcome, and that made them considerably more dangerous than vandals. Earned. The throttle cable is fine, she said. Clutch cable is fine. Earned. I want to look at the fuel lines. Go ahead. She went ahead. Earned. The fuel lines were clean. Bear, she said. Yeah. Earned. The person who did this knows motorcycles. She sat back on her heels. Earned. Not casually. Not enough to look it up. They know this specific type of motorcycle, the Heritage Softail platform. Earned. The specific brake system configuration on this year model well enough to know exactly which failure points to exploit and how to exploit them in a way that would look like mechanical failure on any standard inspection. She paused. Earned. Does that description narrow your suspicion? The silence that followed had weight. Earned. It does, Bear said. Do you want to share the narrowing? Earned. Not yet. Okay. She stood up, and I want you to take it the way it's meant, which is not as pressure and not as judgment. Earned. Say it. The person who did this is still out there. Earned. And they think you're dead. That means right now, tonight, you have something that you won't have the moment they find out you survived the advantage of their certainty. She looked at him directly. Earned. Every hour you spend not acting on your suspicion is an hour that advantage gets closer to expiring. Earned. Bear looked at her for a long moment. You're 19 years old, he said. Earned. You said that already. I know. I'm saying it again because I keep forgetting it while you're talking. Earned. Duke made a sound that might have been a laugh in different circumstances. Earned. I'm not telling you what to do, Lily said. I wouldn't know how to do what you do. Earned. But the part about the advantage, that part is just mechanics. Earned. You had a system that was working. Someone introduced a failure point. Earned. The failure point has been found. She just gestured toward the motorcycle. Earned. Now you decide what you do with that knowledge. Bear stood up from the bench. Earned. He rolled his shoulders slowly, carefully. He'd been still long enough that the ride and the fall had had time to make their opinions known. Earned. He looked at the motorcycle on the lift, and then he looked at Lily, and his expression had changed into something she hadn't seen on him yet. Earned. Something that wasn't the controlled, managed face he'd been presenting all night. Earned. Something more direct. Why are you doing this? He asked. Earned. And I don't mean the repairs. I mean, why are you talking to us like this? Why are you pushing? You could have fixed the bike and taken the money and let us deal with our own situation. Earned. She thought about that honestly, the way he had asked her to. Earned. Because I've been alone with this for 8 months, she said. And tonight I find out that the people who did this to my grandfather's garage are connected to the people who tried to kill you. She let that sit for a second. That means this isn't two separate problems. That means this is one problem. And one problem is actually easier to deal with than two. She held his gaze. And because my grandfather built this place to be somewhere that people who needed help could come. He's been gone 8 months, and I haven't been able to figure out how to honor that the right way. Tonight feels like maybe a way. The four men looked at her. It was Duke who spoke first, and his voice was different than it had been all night, softer, rougher, the way voices get when something has gotten past the defenses. Your grandfather, Duke said, Earl Carter. What was he like? She almost deflected it, almost said he was a good mechanic the way she usually did, because the good mechanic part was safe and the rest of it was not. Instead, she said, he was the kind of man who fixed things for people who couldn't pay and didn't put it on the books so they'd have to feel obligated. He was the kind of man who came in early every day because he said a shop should be ready before the work arrived, not the other way around. He was the kind of man who kept a spare key to the building in a coffee can behind the third shelf because he said there was always going to be someone who needed to get in when nobody was there to let them. And he wanted that person to be able to get in. She stopped. He was the kind of man who took a loan from people who were predators because he didn't want me to find out how bad things were. He thought he could fix it himself. Her voice was steady, and he almost could have. Remy looked away. Duke closed his eyes for a moment. Frank sat very still. Bear said, he sounds like someone worth fighting for. Lily looked at him, she said, he absolutely is. At 4:30 in the morning, Lily found the third thing. She had been doing the kind of thorough inspection that she did when something had already surprised her twice, and she was not willing to be surprised a third time. Going through the motorcycle system by system with the careful attention of someone who has learned that the thing that kills you is almost never the thing you were looking for. She was in the electrical system not because she expected anything, but because she was committed to checking everything when she found it. It was a small device, smaller than a deck of cards, attached to the wiring harness in a location that would require specific knowledge of the heritage Softail electrical layout to find and access. It was not a bomb. It was not a mechanical failure mechanism. It was a tracker. Someone had not only tried to kill Bear, someone had been watching where he went. She held it up in her flashlight beam without speaking, because the moment of silence before she spoke seemed necessary, seemed like the right size container for what she was looking at. Bear saw it from across the garage and went completely still. Is that what I think it is? Duke said. It's a GPS tracker, Lily said. Commercial unit, looks like not custom. You can buy these. She turned it over in her hand. But the installation point suggests someone who knew this specific model's electrical layout well enough to find a location that wouldn't show up on a standard visual inspection. She looked at Bear. How long do you think it's been there? Bear's jaw was doing the thing it did when he was holding something back. 3 weeks is when my bike was serviced, so potentially since the service. Potentially, which means someone has known your location for 3 weeks. Potentially, Bear. She set the device down carefully on the workbench. 3 weeks of location data is a lot of planning. That's not a crime of opportunity. Someone spent 3 weeks watching where you went before they made their move. He was looking at the tracker. He was looking at it with an expression she hadn't seen before, not anger, not fear, but something colder and more precise. The expression of a man who has just had a suspicion confirmed and is now moving from suspicion to certainty and from certainty to decision. He said, yeah. Frank had seen it too. His voice was very quiet. Call Marcus. A pause. Bear, it's 4:30 in the morning. Call Marcus, Bear said again. Tell him what we found. Tell him to pull the logs on access to the service bay from the last month. Tell him. He stopped. He looked at the tracker. Tell him to specifically check the morning of the 14th. Who was in the bay, what they logged, what time they left. Frank took out his phone without further discussion and walked toward the door. Remy and Duke were looking at each other in the way that people look at each other when they're doing rapid mental arithmetic about implications. And Lily was looking at Bear. The 14th, she said. And that's specific. Why the 14th? Bear turned to look at her. And he looked at her for a long moment. And she could see him making a decision not about whether to trust her. And she thought, but about how much of what he was carrying to let out into the air of this particular room at this particular moment. And he sat back down on the bench. My wife died on the 14th, he said. And 3 years ago. I go to the cemetery every month on the 14th. And same route, same time, same road. He paused. It's the one trip I make that everyone who knows me knows I make. And it's the one trip where my route and my timing are completely predictable. He stopped. Someone used that. The sentence hung in the air of the garage. And Lily felt something move through her that was not quite rage and was not quite grief, but was the specific combination of those two things that happens when someone uses a person's love and loss against them. And she felt it the way you feel things in your chest, sudden and physical, the kind of feeling that requires a moment to absorb before you can move again. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be sorry, he said. Be angry. And angry is more useful right now. I am angry, she said. And I've been angry for 8 months. He looked at her. And something shifted in him, some last remaining distance between this man who had fallen off his motorcycle outside her door and this girl standing in her grandfather's garage in the middle of the night. And for the first time, they looked at each other, not as stranger and mechanic, not as biker and 19-year-old, but as two people who understood the specific weight of what the other one was carrying. And Lily, he said, when this is over, and it is going to be over, this garage is going to be okay. And I'm making you that promise right now. She looked at him. And she wanted to deflect it. She wanted to say something practical about promises being cheap and evidence being expensive. Instead, she heard herself say, I know. I believe you. And she was surprised to find that she meant it. Frank came back through the door. And his face had changed. He looked at Bear with an expression that contained something Lily could not read, and Bear went very still looking back at him. And Marcus pulled the logs, Frank said. And morning of the 14th. And one person accessed the service bay 40 minutes before anyone else arrived. He stopped. And Bear, it was Tommy. The garage went completely silent. And Lily did not know who Tommy was. She would find out. But she could measure the weight of that name in this room by what it did to the 4 men around her, by the way Duke closed his eyes, by the way Remy's hand came up to his mouth, by the way Frank stood very still in the doorway looking at Bear with something that was purely and completely devastated, and by what it did to Bear, who said nothing, who stood very still and very straight, who looked at a point on the garage floor for a long time, and then looked up at the motorcycle on the lift, and then looked at Lily, who looked back at him without looking away, because there was nothing she could say, there was nothing anyone could say, so she did the only thing she knew how to do, which was the same thing her grandfather had always done when someone came into this garage, carrying something too heavy for her. Words, she turned back to the work, and she kept her hands moving, and she let the garage be what it had always been, the kind of place where people could fall apart a little, and still be held together, because the work continued and the work was real, and the work would be there when everything else had gone quiet. Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, Bear Walker sat on an old wooden bench in a dead man's garage in the slow, necessary process of deciding what kind of man he was going to be about the worst betrayal of his life. And Lily Carter, who had been alone for 8 months, with a flashlight and a dead man's tools and a debt she hadn't earned, kept working on the motorcycle that had brought all of this to her door, because the brakes needed to be right, and the engine needed to run clean, and whatever came next was going to require that the machine was ready. Earl Carter's granddaughter was going to make sure it was ready. That much at least was something she could do. Nobody slept. That was the first thing Lily noticed as the clock on the wall, the old Snap-on Tools clock her grandfather had hung in 1991, still keeping perfect time, moved past 5 in the morning. Nobody even suggested sleeping. The 4 men moved around the garage with the specific kind of restless energy that belongs to people who are processing something enormous and have decided that movement is preferable to stillness. Duke made coffee on the ancient two-burner hot plate in the back corner. He found the grounds in the cabinet above it without asking, which told Lily he was the kind of man who always found what he needed in unfamiliar places. Remy sat on an overturned milk crate and looked at his phone with an expression of tight concentration. Frank stood near the workbench and spoke quietly into his phone in a voice too low to hear across the room. Bear had not moved from the bench in 20 minutes. Lily kept working. She was doing what she always did when a situation was too large to address. Directly, she broke it into components, addressed each component with full attention, and trusted that the whole would make more sense when the pieces were right. Right now, the component in front of her was the fuel delivery system on the Heritage Softail, which she was inspecting with the same thoroughness she had given everything else. Because she was not going to send this motorcycle back out into the world with anything on it she hadn't personally verified. But she was watching Bear, not in a way he would notice. She had learned, growing up in this garage, how to pay attention to more than one thing at a time. Her grandfather had said, a good mechanic is like a good doctor. You listen to what the patient tells you, and you watch what the patient doesn't say. And the second thing is usually more important than the first. Bear wasn't saying anything right now, but what he wasn't saying was loud. He was doing the work of a man who has discovered that someone he loved like a brother tried to have him killed, and he was doing it in the way that people do that work when they have decided not to fall apart, which is to say slowly, methodically, with the whole body tensed against something that wanted very badly to break through. At 5:17, she set down her tools. She walked to the hot plate and poured 2 cups of coffee. She carried both of them to the bench and sat down next to Bear, not across from him, next to him, close enough that he would know she was there, without it being made into a thing, and she set 1 cup in front of him without saying anything. He looked at the cup, he picked it up. Tommy Briggs, he said. He hadn't said the full name out loud yet. It seemed to take something out of him, the way names do, when they're attached to something you're still making real. We've known each other for 11 years. He's been in my chapter for 9. He drank the coffee. His youngest daughter calls me Uncle Bear. Lily said nothing. He came to my wife's funeral, Bear said. He stood next to me at the grave. He stopped. He set the cup down. He stood next to me at the grave. I know, Lily said. She didn't know Tommy Briggs. She didn't know anything about the funeral except what she was being told right now. But she knew what it meant that someone had stood next to you at the worst moment of your life and looked you in the eyes while already being the person who would eventually try to end yours. That was a specific kind of evil that had no good name because no good name had been made for it yet. Why, she asked. Not pushing, just opening the space in case he needed it. Money, Bear said. The word came out flat and final. It's almost always money. Or fear, usually fear of not having money. He looked at his hands. Pruitt got to him. Somehow, I don't know the full shape of it yet, whether Tommy went to them or they went to Tommy, whether he's in debt, whether they have something on him, but that's the mechanism. That's always the mechanism with people like Pruitt. They find the crack in the wall and they widen it. He paused. I should have seen the crack. You can't see every crack in everyone you know, Lily said. I'm supposed to. That's my job. Road captain means you know your people. He said it with a self-directed severity that she recognized the specific way people speak to themselves when they're holding themselves to a standard that may not be humanly achievable, but that they refuse to lower. I know what Tommy drinks. I know what his kids got for Christmas. I know that his wife has been having medical problems for 2 years that cost more than his income covers. He stopped. I knew that. I knew about the medical bills. I should have learned. What? Lily said quietly. Anticipated that someone would use his wife's illness to turn him into a weapon against you? He went quiet. The crack in the wall, she said, wasn't yours to see. It was put there by people who are professionals at finding cracks and making them wider. That's all they do. That's their whole operation, find the thing someone is most afraid of losing and use it. She looked at him steadily. They found my grandfather's fear of failing me. They found Tommy's fear of losing his wife. That's not a failure of your observation. That's them being very good at what they are. Bear was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're going to make one hell of a business owner someday, you know that?" And she blinked. "What?" "The way you think through problems. And the way you talk to people." He picked up the coffee again. And Earl Carter raised something remarkable, and I don't think he told you often enough. And she felt it in her throat before she could manage it, the sudden specific ache of being told something you needed to hear from a direction you hadn't expected it. And she looked at the garage floor for a moment. She looked at the snap-on clock. And she looked at the motorcycle on the lift. "He told me," she said. And he just used different words. He said things like, "You figured that out faster than I did, and hand me that wrench. You already know which one I need." He wasn't big on direct statements, and he was big on showing you that he trusted you. She paused, and I understood what he meant. Bear nodded slowly. My father was the same way. And before either of them could say anything else, the garage door opened and 3 more motorcycles rolled in out of the early morning dark. And Lily was on her feet before she'd thought about it, the instinct of 8 months of being alone in this building, making itself known. And then she saw Bear's face, the way it shifted from contained grief to something more alert but not alarmed, and she stood down. "I called them," Bear said, "after Frank called Marcus. And I figured we were going to need more people thinking about this." And the 3 new arrivals were different in character from the first 4. First wave Duke, Remy, and Frank had the quality of close counselors, and men who had been in difficult rooms with Bear before and knew how to be useful in them. And these 3 were something else, larger, younger, with the specific contained energy of people who were accustomed to being the answer to problems rather than the people analyzing them. And they came in and they assessed the garage and they assessed Lily in approximately 4 seconds each, and then they looked at Bear. And "Boys," Bear said, "this is Lily Carter. This is her garage. And she's the one who found the tampering. The one in front, a man named Cole, she would learn, built like a refrigerator, and with a surprisingly gentle face for his size, looked at Lily with an expression of direct respect. And you found the score marks on the brake lines?" "Both of them," she said. And Cole looked at Bear. "Both of them," he repeated. "And the tracker," Remy said from across the room. Cole absorbed this. He turned back to Lily. And "Ma'am, I don't know what you're planning to charge for this repair job. But whatever it is, it's not enough. We're working that out," Bear said. He stood up from the bench. The grief was still there. She could see it. But he had put it somewhere manageable, not gone, not suppressed exactly, but organized. The way a person organizes something they know, they'll need to come back to, but not right now. "Cole, what did Marcus tell you?" Cole's expression changed. He looked at Frank, then back at Bear. "He told me about the 14th, and about Tommy." He stopped. "He also told me something else." "Say it." "Tommy called in sick this morning, 40 minutes after Marcus pulled the access logs." Cole's voice was steady and careful. "He called Marcus personally. Said he had a stomach thing, wouldn't be in until afternoon." "Marcus thinks?" "Tommy knows the logs were pulled," Bear said. "That's what Marcus thinks." The room changed temperature. Lily understood what that meant. Tommy Briggs had placed the tracker. Tommy Briggs had compromised the brakes. Tommy Briggs had expected Bear to be dead by now. And the moment someone started looking at access logs, the moment any part of the machinery of discovery began moving, Tommy Briggs had known it was moving. Which meant one of 2 things. Either Tommy Briggs was going to run, or Tommy Briggs was going to do something to prevent the discovery from going further. "Where is he right now?" Bear asked. "Marcus has eyes on his house," Cole said. "And he's there. Cars in the driveway, no movement since the call. Keep eyes on him," Bear said. "Nobody approaches. And nobody spooks him, not yet." "Bear, not yet, Cole." Bear's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be loud. "We do this right, or we don't do it. If we spook Tommy and he runs, we lose the connection to Pruitt. If we lose the connection to Pruitt, we have a man who tried to have me killed and no way to prove the larger operation." He looked at Cole directly. "Tommy is the thread. You pull a thread wrong, the whole thing unravels. You pull it right, it brings everything attached to it." Cole said nothing for a moment. "Then you're the road captain." "I am," Bear said. It was the first time in the hours since she'd met him that she'd heard him say that with the full weight of the title behind it. And not defensively, not as a claim, as a simple statement of fact that carried within it every decision he was making and was going to make about this situation. And he was the road captain. That meant something specific. And it meant he thought before he moved, and he moved with everyone who depended on him in mind. And he did not let his personal pain, and she could see that he was in significant personal pain, override the responsibility of the position. And Earl Carter, she thought, would have understood that man completely. And Lily went back to the motorcycle. She had 3 more systems to check before she could tell him the bike was safe to ride, and she intended to check all 3 of them with the same care she'd given everything else. She was aware of the conversation happening behind her, the 6 men moving through the logistics of the situation, the phone calls being made, and the information being assembled, and she let it happen around her, while her hands moved through the familiar choreography of assessment. And it was Duke who noticed first what she was doing. "She's still going," Duke said quietly to no one in particular. And "She hasn't stopped," Remy said, "since we got here? Or since before we got here?" And since Bear went down, Bear said without looking up from the conversation he was having with Cole. "She's been working the whole time." Cole looked at Lily, and then at the motorcycle, then at Bear. "When did she sleep?" "She hasn't." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Huh," he said, with the tone of a man updating a significant assessment. And at 6:00 in the morning, a truck pulled up outside, and the parts had arrived. The man driving the truck, heavyset, mid-60s, and with the look of someone who had been woken up from a sound sleep and had made peace with it because Bear Walker had asked him to unload the components with the efficiency of long practice and carried and them to the garage door without requiring invitation. And he looked at Bear, he looked at the assembled group of men, he looked at Lily. "You must be the mechanic," he said. "And I'm the mechanic," she said. "Randall Fitch," he said, extending a hand. "And I used to service that bike before your man here moved to a different shop." "And why'd he move?" Randall Fitch looked at Bear. Bear looked back at him with an expression of calm neutrality that said exactly nothing. And Randall Fitch looked back at Lily. "Convenience," he said. And "Sure," said Lily. She looked at the parts he'd brought. And she checked each one against her list with a methodical attention that Randall Fitch watched with an expression that started as mild interest and became something closer to professional respect. And "These are right," she said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me." And "Thank the man who woke me up at 4:30. He looked at Bear again. And "You doing okay?" "I'm doing fine, Randall. You look like you went down on the highway." And "I did go down on the highway. And the bike looks like—" He stopped. And he looked at the Heritage Softail on the lift with the eyes of a man who knew it well. And he walked toward it slowly. He looked at the brake assemblies she had replaced. And he looked at the cable runs. He looked at everything she had opened and addressed and closed again. And he crouched down near the front brake where the score mark had been. And he stayed there for a long time. When he stood up, his face was different. And "That score mark was there when I serviced it 3 weeks ago," he said quietly. "And I missed it." The room went very still. Lily looked at him. And she was watching his face closely, reading it the way she read engines, looking not for what it was showing, but for what it was trying to say. And what she saw was not guilt of complicity. What she saw was the specific devastation of a professional who has realized that something happened on his watch that he should have caught. And "Where was the service done?" Bear asked. His voice was quiet. "At my shop. We've been at the same location for Randall's stop." And "Tommy Briggs drove it in. He said you asked him to drop it off because you were going to be out of town that week." He looked at Bear, and he picked it up when it was done. Bear was very still. And "So the marks were made before the service," Lily said carefully. And the service happened without you seeing them, because the access point is not on any standard inspection checklist. It requires knowing specifically where to look on this year model." She paused. And the tracker was installed during the window between drop-off and pickup, while the bike was in a shop where Tommy Briggs could return without raising questions. And Randall Fitch sat down on a parts box. He sat down the way men sit down when the structural support has been removed from something they thought was solid. And "I've known Tommy for 8 years," he said, to no one in particular. And to the air, "I know," Bear said. "He asked me how my granddaughter was doing. And every time he came in, he asked about my granddaughter." Randall shook his head slowly. She has leukemia. She's 8 years old. He asked about her every time. Earned. Lily felt the same thing she had felt when Bear talked about Tommy standing next to him at his wife's grave. Earned. The particular nausea of learning that someone had used goodness, genuine goodness. Randall's love for his granddaughter. Bear's grief at his wife's grave as the stage setting for cruelty. Earned. Randall Bear said, I need to ask you something. Earned. Ask it. When Tommy dropped off the bike, was he alone? Earned. Randall thought about it. He came in alone, but there was a car that had been parked across the street when he arrived. Earned. I remember thinking it was odd because it was 7:30 in the morning, and that lot across the street doesn't open until 9. He paused. Earned. Dark blue sedan. I didn't think about it at the time. Earned. But you remember it. I remember it now. Yeah. Bear looked at Frank. Earned. Frank was already writing something on a notepad. Earned. Lily understood that she was watching an investigative process that had its own rhythm and logic, not law enforcement's logic, earned, not the formal procedural logic of institutions, earned, but the organic, earned, relational logic of people who had been doing this work informally for a long time and knew how to build a case from the material at hand. Earned. She went back to work. She started on the lower end, the primary chain and tensioner replacement, which was the most labor-intensive part of the repair, and required the focused kind of attention that excluded everything else. Earned. She was aware of the room. She was aware of Bear. But her hands were in the engine, and her mind was in the engine. And the engine was what was going to keep a man alive when he left here. So the engine got all of her. Earned. An hour in, she heard Frank's voice change. Not get louder. Earned. Change the specific tonal shift that happens when someone on a phone call receives information they weren't expecting. Earned. But she didn't look up. Say that again, Frank said. Earned a pause. Are you sure? Not a question. How long ago? Another pause. Earned. Don't do anything. Just watch. She heard him end the call. Earned. Bear, Frank said. Something in Frank's voice made Lily's hands slow. Earned. Tommy's on the move, Frank said. Marcus's guy says he left the house 10 minutes ago. Earned. On foot. Left his car in the driveway. A pause. He's heading toward the payphone on the corner of Route 9 and Mill Street. Earned. Route 9 and Mill Street was 4 minutes from the garage. Earned. Every person in the room understood that simultaneously. Earned. He doesn't know where Bear is, Cole said quickly. Earned. He thinks Bear is dead. He's not coming here. He's making a call, Bear said. Earned. A call he doesn't want made from a traceable phone. He was thinking fast. She could see it, the road captain brain working through logistics with the speed of someone for whom logistics was a survival skill. And he's reporting in, telling Pruitt that the job is done. Earned. Or checking why they haven't seen confirmation yet, Remy said. Earned. Either way, that phone call goes through, and Pruitt knows to start covering tracks. Bear looked at Cole. Earned. Can Marcus get there before Tommy makes the call? Earned. Depends on where Marcus is right now. Cole was already on his phone. Earned. Lily set down her tool. She stood up. She looked at Bear, and she said something that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. Earned. I have the tracker, she said. Bear looked at her. Earned. What? The GPS tracker I pulled off the bike. It's a commercial unit to two-way capable, which means it doesn't just receive location data. It can be queried remotely. She walked to the workbench where she had set it down carefully 6 hours ago. Earned. If Tommy has an app on his phone tied to this tracker, and if the tracker is still active, then when he checks his phone, he'll see the last known location of this motorcycle. She picked it up. Earned. Which right now is showing this garage. The room went completely still. Earned. If Pruitt's people check the tracker, Remy said slowly, they'll know Bear's alive. Earned. And they'll know exactly where he is. Yes, Lily said. So we need to either disable the tracker or move it, Lily said. Earned. Before Tommy makes that call, move it somewhere that doesn't tell them where Bear is. She looked at Bear. Earned. Somewhere strategic. Bear stared at her. Something moved across his face, the specific expression of a man watching someone think 2 steps ahead of where he expected them to be. Earned. Where, he said. She thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. Earned. Hargrove Financial Solutions, she said. The office in Crestwood. She held his gaze. Earned. If the tracker shows up at their own office, they'll spend the next few hours figuring out what that means. Earned. It'll create confusion, and it'll put evidence of the tracking device in a location that connects it to them directly, rather than to whoever installed it. The silence lasted about 3 heartbeats. Then Duke said low and definitive, "I like her." And Cole, Bear said, "How fast can you get to Crestwood?" And Cole held up his phone. "I'll call Danny. He's already up. He's 20 minutes out from Crestwood." He paused. "Bear, this is a deliberate move. This isn't passive. And you understand what we're doing if we do this." "I understand exactly what we're doing," Bear said. "And we're fighting back." He looked at Lily. "You sure about this?" And she thought about Garrett Pruitt. She thought about Hargrove Financial Solutions. And she thought about the notice folded under the socket wrench, the 3 clients who had disappeared in the same month, and her grandfather sitting alone in this garage, doing the math that didn't work and deciding not to tell her because he didn't want her to be afraid. And "I have been sure about this," she said, "for 8 months. And Cole made the call. The tracker was bagged in a clean cloth from the supply shelf and handed to Cole, who was outside and on his motorcycle in under 2 minutes. And the room redistributed itself, the quality of the waiting changing, becoming charged with forward motion rather than the heavy stillness of processing grief. And Bear stood in the center of the garage and looked at the motorcycle on the lift. And "How much longer on the engine?" he asked Lily. 40 minutes for the installation. And another 20 to run checks. She was already back in position. And "An hour if nothing surprises me." "Nothing will surprise you." And "Things always surprise me," she said. "That's why I build in the extra 20 minutes. And despite everything, he almost smiled. Remy's phone rang. And he looked at it and looked at Bear. "It's Marcus." And "Put it on speaker." Marcus's voice filled the garage, younger sounding than Lily had imagined, tight with controlled urgency. And Tommy made the call. "Payphone, Route 9 and Mill." And my guy caught it from across the street. Tommy was on for about 90 seconds, then he walked back the way he came. And 90 seconds, Frank said. "That's long enough to report." And "Not long enough to get instructions back." "Which means Pruitt is now in motion," Bear said. "He's going to start moving things." "Financial records?" "Personnel." He paused. And "Marcus, the documentation we have on the land acquisitions, where is it?" And "Secured," Marcus said immediately. "Digital copies in 4 locations, physical copies with a lawyer in Pittsburgh." And "Good, make sure the lawyer knows to hold everything, regardless of what anyone tells him in the next 48 hours. And including me." A pause on the line. "Including you?" And "If someone calls that lawyer claiming to be me and asks for the documents back, that's not me." Bear's voice was level. "That's someone who got enough information to know the documents exist. Tell him that now." "Got it." A pause. Bear Tommy came back to the house. And "He's inside. How does he look?" "Scared," Marcus said. And "My guy says he looks scared walking back." "Good," Bear said. And it was the first cold thing she had heard him say all night, and the coldness of it was not cruelty. And it was the coldness of a man who has accepted the full reality of a situation and is done softening it in his own mind. And that means he told Pruitt the job was done, and Pruitt believed him. And he doesn't know we're alive and moving yet. We have a window. And "How long?" Frank asked. Bear looked at Lily. 55 minutes, she said, without looking up from the engine. "We have 55 minutes, Bear said. "I'll keep eyes on Tommy," Marcus said. And I'll let you know the moment anything changes." A pause. And "Bear, yeah, I'm glad you're not dead." "Me too," Bear said. And "Me too, Marcus." The call ended. And the garage returned to its working silence, the sound of Lily's tools, and the low murmur of Frank on another call, and Duke's steady breathing, and Remy's fingers moving across his phone screen. And it was the sound of people doing what needed to be done, which was the only sound that had ever really mattered in this building. And at 8 minutes into the 55, Lily hit the first problem. And the flywheel damage was worse than she had initially assessed. And not catastrophically worse, not in a way that made the repair impossible, but worse, in a way that was going to cost her 10 of the minutes she had allocated for testing, which meant the engine checks were going to be compressed, and which meant she was going to have to make a decision about how compressed was acceptable. And she stared at the flywheel for exactly 30 seconds. And then she made the decision and moved. "Talk to me," Bear said from somewhere behind her. He had learned, over the course of the night, that she worked better when there was conversation in the room, not because she was distracted by it, but because it helped her think. "Flywheel damage is deeper than I thought," she said. "I'm adjusting. It's still rideable when I'm done. I want to be clear about that, but it's going to need a full replacement within the next 2 weeks. Push it past that, you're going to get a vibration that'll work itself into other systems. And understood, he said. 2 weeks. 2 weeks maximum. And I'd say one. 1 week, he said, like a man marking something in a mental calendar. After this is over. After this is over, she agreed. And she kept working. Bear kept talking, not about Tommy, not about Pruitt, not about any of it. And he talked about motorcycles. He talked about the first Harley he'd ever ridden, which belonged to his uncle and was older than Bear was, and had a kickstart that required a specific technique to catch properly. He talked about the first long-distance run the chapter had done when he was young, before he had any real position, when he was just a rider with a motorcycle and a group of people he was beginning to understand were going to matter to him for the rest of his life. He talked about the road the way people talk about something they love without embarrassment, with the simple directness of a feeling that is too large and too long-standing to be self-conscious about. Lily listened while she worked. She filed everything away in the particular part of her mind where she kept the things that would be useful later. And she worked, and the engine came together under her hands. The way engines came together, when you understood them gradually, and then all at once, the individual components ceasing to be separate problems and becoming a single working system. At 7:03, the engine was installed. At 7:51, she completed the primary checks. At 7:58, she said, Bear. He was beside her in 3 steps. Start it. He looked at her. You sure? I just spent the last 4 hours making sure. Start it. He swung his leg over the seat. He felt the weight of the bike under him, the way an experienced rider feels a machine, not just sitting on it, but reading it, understanding it the way you understand something you've been in relationship with for a long time. He pressed the starter. The engine turned over, caught, settled into the deep, even pulse of a V-twin that was running exactly as it was supposed to run. Bear sat on the running motorcycle for a moment without speaking. His hand was on the throttle. The engine was breathing evenly under him. Everything was the way it was supposed to be, not despite the damage that had been done to it, but because someone had spent the entire night making it right. He cut the engine. He sat for one more moment. Then he looked at Lily and said, This is the best this bike has run in 6 months. She hadn't planned to feel anything specific in response to that. But she felt something that had Earl Carter's name attached to it, something that tasted like the particular satisfaction of work done well in service of something that mattered. She didn't show it. She wiped her hands on the rag and turned back to the workbench. You'll want to give the primary chain about 50 miles to seat properly, she said. Keep it under 4,000 RPM until then. After that, ride it how you ride it. Lily. His voice had a different quality than she'd heard from him before. She looked at him. Whatever comes next, he said, I want you to know something. Before we walk out of here and into whatever this is going to be. He paused. This garage is not closing. I don't know exactly what we're going to have to do to make that true, but I want you to understand that it is true. It has already been decided, not by me alone. He looked at the other men in the room, at Duke, Remy, Frank, and the 3 who had come later. By all of us. Frank said from near the bench, chapter decision. Made about 40 minutes ago while you were working on the flywheel. She looked at Frank. I didn't hear a vote. We don't always use words, Duke said. Lily looked at the assembled men in her grandfather's garage. She looked at Bear on the motorcycle that had come through her door broken and was now running clean. She looked at the snap-on clock that still kept perfect time. She looked at the folded notice under the socket wrench. She had been alone in this garage for 8 months. She wasn't alone anymore. She could feel the exact moment when that became true, not the moment they walked in, not the moment Bear made his promise, but this moment, when she understood that the decision had already been made without needing to be spoken aloud, the way the best decisions sometimes are. Her throat tightened. She turned back to the workbench. Okay, she said. Her voice was steady. Then let's figure out how to go after Garrett Pruitt. And that was when Bear's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Something in his face went very careful, very still. And who is it? Frank asked. Bear showed him the screen. And Frank's expression changed. Is that Remy started? Tommy, Bear said quietly. Tommy is calling me. And nobody breathed. Bear looked at Lily. She looked back at him. The phone rang a second time. A third. He thinks you're dead, she said. And if he's calling your number, he's checking, Bear said. And or someone told him to check. The fourth ring. Or he's panicking. And answer it, Frank said. Bear looked at the phone. And he looked at it the way a man looks at something when he knows that what happens in the next 30 seconds is going to determine the shape of everything that follows. And he answered. He said nothing. He just held the phone to his ear and let the silence be the first statement. And on the other end of the line, there was breathing. And then a sound that was not quite a word and not quite something else. And then Tommy Briggs's voice, a voice Bear had known for 11 years, a voice he had heard at his wife's graveside, a voice that had asked about his route and his schedule and his service appointment, said something that none of them had expected. And Bear, the voice was broken open. Raw in the way voices get when the person using them has gone past a threshold and cannot get back. And Bear, you're alive. Bear said nothing. I'm so sorry, Tommy said. And the words came out like something structural giving way. And Bear, I'm so sorry. They said they wouldn't. They told me they just needed the route, that they just needed the... He stopped. And they said they would handle it quietly. They didn't tell me they were going to... And Tommy, Bear's voice was very quiet, controlled in the way that things are controlled when they are being held very carefully. Stop talking, stop. Where are you right now? And home. A breath. I'm home. I've been sitting here since I made the call, and another breath. And I told them it was done. But I didn't know. Bear, I swear to God, I didn't know they were going to. And Tommy listened to me very carefully. Bear was looking at a spot on the garage floor. And his free hand was flat on his thigh, pressed down. And do not make any more calls. Do not go anywhere. Do not open the door for anyone you don't recognize. And sit in your house and wait. A pause. You, Bear, are you coming here? And someone is coming, Bear said. It won't be me. But someone is coming, and they are going to sit with you, and you are going to tell them everything. And every conversation you had with Pruitt, every contact you used, every piece of information you gave them, and everything. A long silence on the line. Bear, Tommy said. And my wife. They said if I didn't her treatment. And I know, Bear said. The two words were quieter than anything else he'd said all night. And I know, Tommy. We'll deal with that. But first, you tell us everything. And all of it. He ended the call. The garage was completely silent except for the snap-on clock marking time on the wall. And Bear sat on the motorcycle with the phone in his hand and his head slightly bowed, and nobody said anything because nothing needed to be said, and everything that could be said was too large for the room anyway. And Lily looked at him. She looked at the phone in his hand. And she looked at the men around him who were each doing their own version of the work. Bear was doing the work of holding something complicated and full and refusing to let it make them into something they didn't want to be. And she went to the bench. She picked up the Hargrove financial notice, unfolded it for the first time since she'd folded it, and put it under the wrench. And she read the full amount one more time. And she read the name at the bottom. She read the date. And she set it face up on the workbench where everyone in the room could see it. And Garrett Pruitt tried to take this garage, she said. And her voice was clear. And he tried to take it by manufacturing my grandfather's failure, and he tried to hold it by making the debt unpayable. And he has been expecting for 8 months that I would eventually sign the papers and walk away. She looked at Bear, and I haven't signed anything. Bear looked at her. So we are going to take him apart, she said. And carefully, completely. And we are going to use every single piece of what Tommy Briggs is about to tell us to make sure he never does this to another family's 40 years of work. She looked around the room at the assembled men. And is everyone in agreement? Duke said it first. Just one word, flat and certain as a load-bearing beam. Yes. Then Remy, then Frank, and then Cole, and from the doorway, and who had come back in while Bear was on the phone, and who looked at the notice on the workbench, and then at Lily and said simply, "Earned, all the way." Earned. Bear got off the motorcycle. He stood up straight. He looked at Lily across the garage floor with an expression that she would remember for the rest of her life, not because of what it contained, which was too complex to fully name, but because of what it said, which was, I see you. I saw you the moment I walked through this door, and I will not forget what I saw. All the way, he said. Outside, the sun was coming up. The first real light of the morning coming through the crack under the garage door and touching the floor where Earl Carter had stood for 31 years, where his granddaughter was still standing. Still standing. The sun had been up for 40 minutes when Tommy Briggs started talking. Duke and Remy had gone to sit with him. Bear's decision, made quietly but without hesitation, because he understood that Tommy needed to be talking to people he knew rather than to strangers, and because Bear himself could not be in that room yet and knew it. Bear was a man who understood his own limits with a precision that came from long experience of being pushed past them. Sitting across from Tommy Briggs right now, hearing Tommy's voice in the same room his wife's name was going to come up in, was something Bear was going to do eventually, but not yet. Not while the information gathering was still happening. Not while he still needed to think straight. Frank was managing the phone calls. There were many phone calls now, an expanding network of them, because what they were building was not a confrontation, it was a case, and a case required documentation and witnesses, and the kind of careful assembly of facts that could not be rushed without being ruined. Frank was good at this. Lily had understood within the first hour that Frank was the person in this group who had the most experience turning chaos into something structured, and watching him work was like watching someone do a kind of engineering. She hadn't seen the engineering of information, of connection, of cause and effect, arranged into a form that other people could follow. Cole had not come back inside. Cole was outside on his motorcycle, positioned at the top of Route 9, with a line of some sight on the road in both directions, because someone needed to be watching, and Cole was constitutionally suited to watching. He checked in every 15 minutes. His reports were brief and consistent. Nothing unusual. Traffic light. No vehicles making more than one pass. Lily was cleaning up. Not the garage. The garage would take a full day to restore to its working order, and that was a project for a different hour. She was cleaning up the workbench, the tools she'd used through the night, organizing them back into the places they belonged with the muscle memory of 1,000 previous nights. It was the kind of work that her hands could do without her mind, which meant her mind was free to go where it needed to go, which right now was through everything she'd learned in the past 8 hours and everything she still didn't know. Bear was sitting on the workbench, not the bench, the actual workbench, which was taller, which meant he was slightly above floor level, which meant he could see the whole garage from where he was sitting. She wasn't sure if that was deliberate. She suspected that it was. Pruitt's operation has been running for at least 2 years, she said, not looking up from the tools she was sorting. Probably longer. 2 years is just how far back your documentation goes. That's right, Bear said. And the land corridor, the properties he's been accumulating, how many parcels total? Based on what we can track, somewhere between 14 and 19. Frank thinks there are acquisitions we haven't connected yet that are under holding company names we haven't identified. So he's been patient, she said. He didn't rush it. He built the apparatus slowly, made each individual acquisition look unrelated, and he was going to sit on the land until the highway extension pushed the values up and then sell everything at once. She set down a socket wrench and picked up another, which means he's not finished. He still needs more parcels to complete the corridor. Bear was watching her. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about which parcels he still needs. She looked up at him. Because the ones he hasn't gotten yet, those are the businesses that haven't been approached yet, or that have been approached and resisted. And if we know which ones those are, we know who he's going to go after next. Bear said nothing for a moment. Then, Frank. Frank was across the garage, phone to his ear, but he heard his name and held up one finger without breaking his conversation. Lily went back to the tools. How much of what Tommy told Duke and Remy do you think is the whole truth? Bear considered this the way he considered things fully, without rushing to the answer. 60% maybe. Not because he's deliberately hiding things. Earned. Because when people are in the kind of emotional state Tommy is in right now, they tell you what's loudest in their memory. Earned. The rest comes out later in layers, when the loudest things have been said and they have space to access the quieter parts. And what's the 60%? The mechanism of how Pruitt approached him. The specific information Tommy gave them. The timeline he paused. Earned. The part about his wife's treatment is true. I don't need anyone to confirm that I know Tommy's situation. And it's true, but you don't know yet if that's the whole reason. And no, Bear said. Not yet. Frank ended his call. He walked over to them with the expression of some carrying information that has a specific weight. Earned. I talked to the lawyer in Pittsburgh. Everything is secured. He's been briefed. He paused. I also talked to a contact in the county assessor's office. Earned. She pulled the property transfer records on the corridor parcels, all of them, including the ones we hadn't connected yet. And Bear, there are 23 parcels total. We were missing 4. And which 4? Frank named them. Lily listened, and on the third name her hands went completely still. And repeat that one, she said. Frank looked at her. He repeated it. Keller's Hardware, she said. On Route 9. You know it? Earned. My grandfather sent me there at least once a week for 30 years, she said. Roy Keller has had that store since before I was born. He and my grandfather, they were friends. Real friends. Sunday dinner friends. She set down the tool she was holding. Earned. Roy's been trying to get me to sign over the garage. Earned. He started about 2 months after my grandfather died. Earned. He said it was a good offer from a developer, said he thought Earl would have wanted me to take it, said I was too young to carry it alone. Earned. The garage went quiet. He said Earl would have wanted me to take it, she said again. Earned. She heard herself saying it, and she heard the sentence differently than she had heard it all the times before, when she had been too grieved and too tired and too focused on survival to hear it properly. And he pushed specifically on that. Earl would have wanted you to be secure. Earned. Earl wouldn't want you struggling like this. He used my grandfather's name as leverage. She looked at Bear. Earned. Roy Keller has been telling me to sell to Hargrove Financial for 7 months. Earned. Bear looked at Frank. Frank looked back at Bear. He might not know what he's part of, Frank said carefully. Earned. A lot of the people in this operation don't know the full picture. Earned. Pruitt compartmentalizes. He tells each person only as much as they need to know to do what he needs them to do. Earned. Or he's fully in it, Lily said. She was surprised by her own voice, how even it was, how the anger in it was cold rather than hot. Because cold anger was more useful than hot anger, and some part of her had learned that somewhere along the way. And I don't know which. And I'm not going to accuse Roy Keller of anything I can't support. And but I want to know, we can find out, Bear said. And how? The same way we found out everything else. Carefully. With documentation, he looked at her steadily. Lily, I need you to understand something about what we're building here. And this is not a confrontation. And if we walk up to Pruitt or to Roy Keller or to anyone connected to this and we confront them with what we know right now, and we get denials, and we get lawyers, and we get evidence destroyed before it can be used. And what we're building is a package: financial records, and property transfers, and testimony, and the tracker, and the brake tampering, and that package goes somewhere that can actually do something permanent with it. And where, she said. That's what the next few hours are for, he said. And that was when Cole's voice crackled through the radio on Frank's belt. And we've got a car, Cole said. Dark blue sedan, Route 9 northbound. And passed me twice. Frank had the radio up instantly. And make late model Buick, tinted windows, county plates, but I can't get the full number from here. A pause. And third pass. Definitely a third pass. They're slowing near the garage. And every person in the room recalibrated simultaneously. And Bear was off the workbench. Frank was moving toward the window. And Lily stood where she was and felt the particular quality of stillness that comes when a situation that has been theoretical becomes immediate. And they're looking for confirmation, Bear said quietly. And Pruitt sent someone to verify, because the tracker went to his office and he doesn't understand what that means yet. And Tommy said the job was done. And something in the math isn't adding up for him. And can they see the motorcycle from the road, Frank asked. And Lily shook her head. Not with the bay door closed. And they can see light through the front window, but they can't see the interior. Earned. So they don't know for certain, Frank said. They're establishing certainty, Bear said. Earned. Or trying to. He looked at Lily. Is there another way out of this building? Earned. Back door. Opens onto the alley behind the property. She paused. Earned. But if I close the front and go dark, they'll know something changed. Earned. They've been watching for a while, they'll notice. Earned. Bear absorbed this. So we stay normal, he said. Whatever normal looks like from the outside. Earned. Lily thought about that for 2 seconds. Then she did something none of them expected. Earned. She walked to the front window, the one visible from the road, and she picked up a rag and she started cleaning a section of glass. Earned. Slowly. The way someone cleans glass when they're the person who works here, and there's nothing unusual happening, and this is just a Tuesday morning in a mechanic's garage. Earned. She could feel the car on the road without looking at it. Earned. She cleaned the glass. Earned. Bear watched her from across the room with an expression she couldn't see, but could feel the specific quality of attention that a person gives when they are watching someone do something that takes a kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. Earned. Cole's voice. They're pulling away. Northbound. I'm going to lose them before the highway so they don't know I was watching. Earned. Go, Bear said into Frank's radio. Don't get mate. Earned. Copy. The garage exhaled. Lily kept cleaning the glass for another 30 seconds because stopping too quickly would have felt like breaking a spell, and then she set the rag down and walked back to the workbench. And okay, she said. Okay, Bear agreed. Frank's phone rang again, and he looked at it. He looked at Bear. Pittsburgh, he said. And the lawyer, he answered. He listened. His face went through 3 distinct expressions in 30 seconds: attention, then understanding, then something that landed close to satisfaction. And thank you, yes. Immediately. He hung up, and he looked at Bear. Arthur Baines is ready now, Bear said. And he's been ready since 6 this morning. He was waiting for my call to say we had everything we needed. Frank looked around the room at Bear, at Lily, at Cole, who had just come back through the door from his surveillance run. And he thinks what we have is enough to trigger a formal investigation. Not a guaranteed prosecution, he was specific about that. He doesn't make promises he can't keep, but enough that the appropriate authorities will have to act on it. And the property fraud alone is significant. The tampering with Bear's motorcycle is a separate criminal matter that adds a serious charge. He paused. And the testimony from Tommy, if it'll hold, Bear said. And Tommy will hold. If it holds, we have a direct connection between Pruitt and the attempt on your life. Earned. Which takes this from financial fraud into something that carries real consequences. Earned. Lily looked at the Hargrove financial notice on the workbench. Earned. What about the loan? What about the $47,000? Earned. Frank looked at her. Arthur thinks the loan agreement is challengeable. Earned. The predatory terms, the structure of the interest, there's case law. Earned. He's not promising, but he thinks a strong argument can be made that the agreement itself is unenforceable. He paused. He'd need to see the original documents. I have them, Lily said. And I have everything. Every piece of paper going back to the day they approached my grandfather. And she said it and realized, as she said it, why she had kept everything, why she hadn't thrown out the notices or the correspondence or the original loan agreement, and why she had filed every single document in the cabinet behind the 3rd shelf where Earl had kept the spare key. And not because she'd had a plan for them, because some part of her had known she was going to need them eventually. Because Earl Carter's granddaughter did not throw things away that might still be useful. Can you get them now? Frank asked. She was already at the cabinet. She pulled out the folder. It was a manila folder, the kind her grandfather had used for everything, labeled in his handwriting in the careful block letters he used when he wanted something to be legible forever. The label said Hargrove Financial, and the handwriting was so recognizably Earl that she had to hold it for a moment before she could open it. And she opened it. She handed it to Frank. Frank went through it page by page with the attention of someone who had looked at a lot of documents and understood what he was looking at. He paused at the original loan agreement. He paused again at the first revised statement, the one where the fees had appeared that had not been in the original. He held it up. This revision, did your grandfather sign this? No, Lily said. I checked. His signature's on the original agreement only. The revision has a typed acknowledgement, but no wet signature. Arthur needs to see this specifically, Frank said. And he looked up at Lily with an expression that combined professional respect with something warmer. And you read these documents carefully. I read everything carefully, she said. My grandfather taught me that too. Bear looked at her from across the room. And something in his expression shifted a small movement, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but that changes the whole quality of a face. And she didn't ask him about it. She turned back to Frank. What's the next step? She said. Arthur is driving down from Pittsburgh, Frank said. And he'll be here in 3 hours. And we sit down with him. And we go through everything your documents and our documentation and Tommy's testimony, and he determines what gets filed and where it gets filed and in what order. And he paused. And this is going to move fast once it moves. Arthur is the kind of lawyer who, when he has what he needs, doesn't let it sit. And good, Lily said. I don't want it to sit. Bear stood up from the workbench. And he stretched carefully, working around whatever his arm and his ribs were telling him about the previous night. And he walked the length of the garage slowly, the way someone walks through a space they are learning. And he stopped near the old snap-on clock. He looked at it for a moment. And 1991, Lily said. He looked at her. And the clock. My grandfather put it up in 1991. He said a shop without a clock is a shop that doesn't respect time, and a shop that doesn't respect time doesn't respect its customers. She paused. And he had opinions about everything. The best people do, Bear said. And what time did Pruitt's car come by? Bear looked at the clock. And 6:53. So he sent someone within 40 minutes of Tommy's call. She worked through the implication. And that's fast. That's faster than I'd expect if he genuinely believed the job was done, and there was nothing to worry about. And Bear went very still. You're right. He sent someone to verify because something about Tommy's call made him uncertain, she said. And either Tommy said something that didn't land right, or Pruitt already had independent information that made him doubt the report. She looked at Bear. And is there anyone else who would have been watching your route last night? Anyone besides Tommy? And Bear thought about it. The tracker, he said slowly. And if Pruitt was monitoring the tracker directly, not through Tommy but himself, then he would have seen the tracker go offline at this location. And Route 9, near this garage. And then he would have seen it reappear at his own office building in Crestwood, Lily said. And which is when he knew something was wrong, before Tommy even called. And the implications of that rearranged several things at once. And he knows the job failed, Bear said. He's known since before Tommy called, Lily said. And Tommy's call didn't confirm success for him. It told him that Tommy didn't know the job had failed. And which means Pruitt now has two problems: the original target, who is still alive, and an asset who has gone unreliable. And Frank looked at both of them. He's going to cut Tommy loose, he said. And or silence him, Cole said from the doorway. He'd been listening from there since he came back in, and his voice was flat and precise. And if Tommy becomes a liability, Marcus, Bear said immediately. And he had his phone out before Frank could reach for the radio. And he dialed. 1 ring, 2 Marcus, listen to me. Right now. And I need 2 people on Tommy Briggs's house. Not 1. And 2, and they don't leave under any circumstances until I say otherwise. He listened. And I don't care. Do it, he hung up. The room had reorganized itself around a new urgency. And Pruitt is moving, Bear said. He was in road captain mode. Now she could see the shift, complete and total, the personal grief folded away, and the operational mind taking full occupancy. And he's going to start burning things down. Evidence, connections, people who know too much. And we have a window before he gets to the parts that matter most. He looked at Frank. And can Arthur move faster than 3 hours? I can ask him to, Frank said. Already dialing. Do it. Bear turned to Cole. I need you to go to Randall Fitch's shop and sit with him. And not because I think he's in danger, I think. Pruitt doesn't know Randall is relevant yet. And but if Pruitt pulls on that thread, I'm already going, Cole said. And he was out the door before Bear finished the sentence. And Lily watched all of this and felt something she hadn't expected to feel, a kind of fierce clarity. And the specific emotion that comes when you have been alone with something for a very long time, and suddenly you are not alone with it anymore, and the weight of it distributes across more people, and you realize how heavy it actually was by how much lighter it gets. She had been alone for 8 months. In one night, she had acquired an army. Not an army she had asked for. Not an army she had planned for. An army that had driven itself through her front door on a dying motorcycle and had decided in the course of a single winter night that her fight was their fight. Because of who they were. Because of what they believed about loyalty. Because of what a 19-year-old mechanic had shown them about what it meant to stay. She walked to the cabinet behind the third shelf. She reached in and she felt for the coffee can that Earl had kept there for 30 years. She found it. She opened it. The spare key was inside, the same spare key that had been there for as long as she could remember. She held it for a moment. Then she put it back and closed the can and put it back where it belonged. Because this garage was still here, and the spare key still had its job to do, and some things you put back because they still matter exactly where they are. Frank's call to Arthur Baines produced results. Arthur would be there in 90 minutes. He was already in the car. In the 50 minutes that followed, things happened in rapid sequence. Tommy Briggs completed a full recorded statement, with Duke and Remy, his voice barely holding together for most of it, according to Duke's text update. But the information solid and complete and more extensive than any of them had expected. Tommy had been deeper in Pruitt's operation than just providing Bear's route. He had been doing it for 5 months, small pieces of information. Nothing he thought was dangerous. Nothing he thought would get anyone killed. And then the pieces had assembled themselves into something he hadn't understood until it was too late to take back. He also gave them 3 names they hadn't had before. Names of other people inside the club's extended network who had been approached by Pruitt's operation. Not the inner chapter, none of Bear's core people, which was the thing that mattered most, but peripheral connections. People who existed in the orbit of the club without being bound by it. People who had been identified as potential assets and cultivated over months. 2 of them had provided information. One had refused and had subsequently had serious problems with a state licensing board that nobody had been able to explain at the time. The licensing board, Bear said when Frank relayed this. He said it slowly, turning it over. He's got someone in the county government. The planning official, Lily said. The one whose signature was on the documents. It goes deeper than one's signature. Bear looked at Frank. This is bigger than Pruitt. Pruitt is the mechanism, but there's infrastructure behind him. Someone who can influence licensing boards and planning commissions and who knows about highway extensions before they're public knowledge. Frank was nodding slowly. Arthur needs to know this before he decides where to file. Arthur is going to have more to work with than he was expecting, Bear said. The second major development came from Cole at Randall Fitch's shop. Randall, it turned out, had been keeping his own records. Not as any kind of organized investigation, simply because Randall Fitch was a methodical man who logged everything that happened in his service bay as a matter of professional habit. Those logs included Tommy's 2 visits on the date of the service, timestamps included. They included the dark blue sedan in the lot across the street, which Randall had noted because he noted everything with a timestamp of 7:31 a.m. They included a phone call from a number Randall didn't recognize that had come 3 days before the service date, asking questions about Bear Walker's service schedule that Randall had answered innocently because there was no reason not to answer innocently. That phone number, when Marcus ran it, traced back to a prepaid phone purchased in Crestwood. Crestwood was where Hargrove Financial Solutions had its office. Cole drove Randall and his logs to the garage in Randall's truck. When Randall walked in and saw what had assembled itself in Earl Carter's garage over the course of one night, he stood in the doorway for a moment and said, "Lord have mercy. Y'all have been busy. Sit down, Randall," Bear said. "Arthur Baines is on his way. You're going to want to tell him everything you just told Cole." "Arthur Baines, the lawyer? From Pittsburgh, you know him?" "I know his father," Randall said. "Good family. Old school. The kind that means what they say when they say something." He sat down. "All right, I'll tell him everything." It was in this interval, with Randall sitting at the workbench going through his logs, Frank managing the increasingly complex web of phone calls, and Bear standing in the middle of the garage with the focused stillness of a man holding many moving parts in the right configuration that Lily went to the cabinet under the workbench and took out the small box of personal items she kept there. And it wasn't a big box. It held a photograph, a folded note, and a small brass compass. The photograph was Earl and Lily taken at this garage 2 years ago, Earl in his coveralls, Lily in hers, both of them squinting into the sun coming through the open bay door, both of them looking like exactly who they were. The note was in Earl's handwriting, 3 sentences, written on a torn piece of parts paper, left on the workbench the morning before he died. She had found it when she came in the next day. It said, "Lily bug." The oil on the Hutchins truck was a quart low. Check it when he comes back. I'm proud of you every single day. She read it the way she always read it when she took it out. She put it back. She put the box back. She turned around to find Bear watching her. She didn't explain the box. She didn't need to. He looked at her with the expression of a man who understood without explanation and had the sense not to make a moment out of understanding. You're still on your feet, he said. So are you. I didn't work on an engine all night. I didn't fall off a motorcycle at 70 miles an hour. He almost smiled again. The same fractional near smile as before. She was starting to understand that this was what smiling looked like on him, not a large expression but a real one, which made it more valuable than most full smiles she'd seen. When this is over, he said, you're going to sleep for about 18 hours. Probably, she said, but not until it's over. Arthur Baines arrived in 1 hour and 22 minutes, 8 minutes ahead of the revised schedule, which told Lily something about Arthur Baines before she saw him. He was smaller than she'd expected, which she recognized as a foolish expectation since intellect has nothing to do with height. And he had the specific quality of attention that certain lawyers and certain doctors develop the ability to enter a room and immediately understand the architecture of what has happened in it. He shook hands with Bear. He shook hands with Lily and looked at her directly when Frank introduced her as the mechanic who found the tampering and identified the initial Hargrove connection. How old are you? Arthur said. And then immediately, I'm sorry. That was rude. 19, Lily said. And you're not the first person to ask tonight. Arthur looked at Bear. Bear gave him nothing. Arthur looked back at Lily and said, okay. Walk me through what you found, in order, starting with the first thing you noticed. She walked him through it, all of it, every step of the inspection, every finding, every inference she had drawn, and on what basis. She spoke clearly and in order, and she did not editorialize. Arthur listened without interruption, making notes on a legal pad in handwriting that was surprisingly large for a man of his precision. When she finished, he sat with his notes for a moment. The score mark on the front brake fitting, he said. You said it was the same tool signature as the rear. Same tool. Same technique. Same pressure application. She said. I've looked at a lot of brake line damage. Stress fractures from road vibration have a different profile than tool contact. These were consistent with a rotary cutting tool applied at a specific angle to achieve partial but not complete severance. Could you testify to that? She looked at him steadily. Yes. Have you documented it? She reached under the workbench and brought out the camera, her grandfather's old digital camera, the one she used to photograph damage for insurance records, and handed it to Arthur. She had photographed both score marks before she replaced the assemblies. She had done it automatically, from habit, the way Earl had taught her to document everything before she touched it. Because what you see before you start is evidence, and what you see after you finish is just your work. Arthur scrolled through the photographs. He stopped at the front brake image, and he looked at it for a long time. Miss Carter, he said. These photographs are dated and time-stamped by the camera metadata. Yes, she said. It's set to correct time. Has been since my grandfather set it up. Arthur looked at Bear. She documented the evidence before she repaired the damage. I know, Bear said. This is Bear. This is significant. A defense argument for the tampering charge is going to be that the damage could have occurred in the crash. These photographs were taken before the crash damage was addressed. They establish pre-existing deliberate tampering with an evidentiary standard that's going to be very hard to attack. She also found it, identified it, and told me what it meant before she knew anything about who I was or who might be responsible, Bear said. She thought I was a random customer who'd had bad luck with his bike. Arthur looked at Lily. He looked at her the way he had looked at the photographs, with the careful, assessing attention of someone who was determining the value of something. Miss Carter, he said, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think about it seriously before you answer. Okay. When this moves forward, and it will move forward, I'm confident of that there is going to be a moment where the people on the other side of this look at the evidence and look for its weakest point. The mechanical testimony, the photograph, the chain of custody for the tracker, all of that is solid. Your grandfather's loan documents with the unsigned revision are solid. Tommy Briggs's testimony has risks, but it's corroborated. He paused. But you are a 19-year-old girl working alone in a struggling garage at midnight. Someone on the other side of this is going to stand up and suggest that your findings were either mistaken or shaped by motivation. That you had reason to find what you found because you needed the connection to be there. He held her gaze. Are you prepared for that? Lily thought about it. Not the question itself. She had already known this was coming, had known it the way you know things that are predictable about how the world works. She thought about how she wanted to answer it. My grandfather taught me to measure twice, she said. Every finding I gave you tonight, I arrived at twice. I looked, then I looked again, then I documented before I touched anything, then I looked a third time at the documentation. I can walk through every step of every inspection with anyone who wants to question it. She paused. And yes, I had motivation to find a connection. I've had motivation for 8 months, but motivation doesn't manufacture physical evidence. The score marks are on the brake fittings. The tracker is in a bag on that shelf. The unsigned revision to my grandfather's loan agreement is in your hand. I didn't put any of that there. I just found it and refused to look away. The garage was quiet. Arthur Baines looked at Lily Carter for a long moment. Bear, he said, without looking away from her. Yeah, Bear said. You fell off your motorcycle in exactly the right place. I know, Bear said. I've known that since approximately midnight. Arthur opened his briefcase. He began laying documents on the workbench with the organized efficiency of someone who had been building toward this moment for the entire drive down from Pittsburgh. He began explaining, in clear and specific terms, what was going to happen next, and in what order and why. And the room organized itself around his explanation with the quality of people who have been waiting for this shape to become visible and are relieved now that it is. But Lily was not fully listening to the legal strategy yet. She was looking at the Hargrove financial notice that was still face up on the workbench, and she was thinking about Roy Keller telling her Earl would have wanted her to sell, and she was thinking about the 3 clients who had left in the same month, and she was thinking about her grandfather sitting in this garage with a cup of coffee gone cold on the nightstand, working the math that didn't add up, choosing not to burden her with the weight of it. She was thinking about what it was going to mean when this was done, not the legal outcome. She trusted Arthur Baines for that, in the way that you trust someone who has come in from Pittsburgh at 90 minutes notice with a briefcase full of preparation. She was thinking about the other thing, the thing that didn't have a legal remedy. Earl Carter had died worried about his granddaughter's future. He had died in a situation that had been manufactured for him, and he had not known that, and he had carried the weight of it alone in the weeks before his death, and there was no legal filing in the world that was going to retroactively remove that weight from those weeks or give him back the peace of mind he had deserved. The only thing that was going to honor that was what she did next, what she built in this garage after today, what she made of the thing he had left her. She was going to make something he would have been proud of, and she already was. Frank touched her arm. She looked at him at the pale gray eyes that had been watching this whole night with the quiet steadiness of someone who had seen a great deal of the world and had decided somewhere along the way what kind of person to be in it. And he knew, Frank said quietly, just to her, not loud enough for the room. Whatever he worried about in those last weeks, he knew who you were, and he had been watching you your whole life. He paused. That's not something you know from legal documents. That's something you know from meeting you. She looked at Frank for a moment. Thank you, she said. She turned back to Arthur's briefcase and the documents being laid out across the workbench, and the 9 men assembled in her grandfather's garage on a Tuesday morning in February, and she took a breath, and she picked up the unsigned Hargrove loan revision and handed it to Arthur Baines, and she said, "Tell me exactly what we're going to do with this." And he told her. Arthur Baines worked fast. That was the first thing Lily learned about him, that the precision she had seen in the way he organized documents on her grandfather's workbench translated directly into speed. Because when you know exactly what you have and exactly where it needs to go, you don't waste time on anything that isn't moving you there. By noon on Tuesday, 3 separate filings were in motion. The first was a formal complaint to the State Attorney General's office, supported by the documented pattern of predatory loan structuring, the unsigned revision to Earl Carter's loan agreement, and the property transfer records Frank had assembled over 6 months. The second was a referral to the county district attorney Arthur's contact there, a woman named Patricia Howell, who had been looking for a way into Garrett Pruitt's operation for 14 months and had not previously had the evidentiary foundation to move, covering the attempted murder of Jackson Walker and the tampering with his motorcycle, supported by Lily's photographs, the physical evidence of both brake score marks, the GS tracker chain of custody, and Tommy Briggs's recorded statement. The third was a civil filing on behalf of the estate of Earl Carter, challenging the enforceability of the Hargrove loan agreement based on the fraudulent revision and the documented pattern of manipulated client attrition that had artificially created the conditions requiring the loan in the first place. Arthur explained each filing in plain language, which Lily appreciated. He explained what each one was likely to produce, in what time frame, and what the risks were. He didn't oversell. He said more than once, "I can't promise you an outcome. I can promise you that what we're filing is solid, and that solid things tend to hold up." She trusted him. Not blindly, she was constitutionally incapable of trusting anything blindly, which was a quality Earl Carter had spent years cultivating in her, and that she was grateful for now more than ever. She trusted him the way she trusted a well-built engine, because she had looked at the components, assessed the construction, and found nothing that should fail under reasonable conditions. At 12:47 p.m., Patricia Howell's office issued a material witness protection order for Tommy Briggs and his family. It arrived via Marcus's phone as a text confirmation, and when Bear read it, he closed his eyes for a moment, a single moment, brief and private, and then opened them again. His wife's treatment, he said to Frank. "Already in motion," Frank said. Arthur has a contact at the hospital. The billing situation is being reviewed under a financial assistance program, and it's not guaranteed, but it's moving. Bear said nothing for a moment. Then Tommy didn't have to call me. He had already made his report. He thought I was dead. He could have stayed quiet and nobody would have known he was involved, not immediately. He paused. He called because he couldn't live with it. That's the thing about Tommy. He's not a bad man. He made a decision that bad people offered him, and then he couldn't live with what it cost. That distinction is going to matter in how this resolves for him, Arthur said. It matters to me right now, Bear said. That's what I care about right now. Lily was listening from the other side of the garage, where she was finally, after 18 hours, eating something crackers and peanut butter from the cabinet, which was what there was, which was fine because her grandfather had lived on crackers and peanut butter through more than one difficult stretch and had considered it entirely sufficient fuel for whatever needed to be done. She thought about Tommy Briggs sitting in his house waiting, and about his wife in a hospital somewhere, and about how Garrett Pruitt had looked at that situation, a man with a sick wife and bills he couldn't cover, and had seen not a person in pain, but a lever to pull. That was the thing about Pruitt that she kept coming back to, the thing that was harder to process than the fraud, or even the attempted murder. The calculation of it, the way he had looked at human vulnerability and seen utility rather than humanity. Her grandfather had been a lever too. His love for her, his fear of failing her that had been the lever. The 3 clients who left in the same month hadn't left. They'd been moved. Someone had made calls, said things, and the clients had gone, and Earl Carter had sat in this garage and done the math and decided to handle it quietly rather than frighten his granddaughter, and Pruitt had been counting on exactly that decision. He had known Earl well enough to predict what Earl would do. That knowledge that Pruitt had understood her grandfather well enough to exploit him sat in her chest like something that would need a long time to fully dissolve. She ate her crackers. She kept listening. At 2:15 in the afternoon, the first break came. Cole's phone rang. He listened for 45 seconds. His face changed in a way that made everyone in the room pay attention without knowing why. He said copy and ended the call and looked at Bear. Pruitt tried to move, Cole said, an hour ago. Car service to the airport. Marcus's contact at the cab company flagged it. He paused. Patricia Howell had a travel alert on him. He got to the departure level and was detained before he checked in. The garage went completely still. He's in custody? Bear said. Being questioned, Cole said. Not arrested yet. Patricia's being careful about the sequence. She wants everything filed correctly before the arrest, so there's no procedural challenge. But he's not going anywhere. He looked at Lily. She specifically asked Arthur to confirm that the Carter loan documents are part of the filing. She wants to make sure the predatory lending charges are included in the initial complaint, not added later. They're included, Arthur said. He was already on his phone. Lily set down the crackers. She looked at the Hargrove financial notice on the workbench. She looked at it for what she realized might be the last time it would need to have the power over her that it had had for 8 months. She didn't pick it up. She didn't need to hold it anymore. Bear, she said her. It's happening, she said. Yeah, he said it is. Is this how it usually feels? He thought about it honestly, the way he thought about everything. It usually feels faster in the telling than in the living, he said. In the living, it's slow and uncertain, and there are a lot of moments where you can't see the shape of it. And then suddenly you can, and the shape was always going to be what it is. She nodded slowly. Go home, Lily, he said gently. Sleep? You have been awake for how long? 22 hours, she said. Go sleep. We'll be here. Frank is staying. Marcus has people outside. He held her gaze. This garage is not going to do anything without you knowing about it. She looked around the space her grandfather had built. She looked at the motorcycle on the lift, fully repaired, fully safe, ready to go. She looked at the snap-on clock, which said 2:23 in the afternoon. She looked at the men who had spent the night in this building with her, who had arrived as strangers and were leaving as something she didn't have the precise word for yet. She picked up her jacket. If anything moves before I wake up, she said to Frank, you call me. The moment anything moves, Frank said. She looked at Bear one more time. Thank you, she said, for falling off your motorcycle outside my garage. He looked at her with that fractional near smile that she had learned to read correctly. Thank you, he said, for opening the door. She went home. She slept for 16 hours straight. The shape of what followed was not simple or clean, because nothing real ever is. Garrett Pruitt was arrested on Thursday morning, 48 hours after he had been detained at the airport, when Patricia Howell's office had everything in the correct order. The charges were extensive. The financial fraud counts alone filled 6 pages, and they included, as a separate and serious matter, conspiracy in the attempted murder of Jackson Walker. The county planning official, whose signature had appeared in too many places, was placed on administrative leave the same afternoon. 2 members of the county assessor's office followed within the week. The civil filing on Earl Carter's estate moved more slowly, as civil matters do, but it moved. Arthur Baines was relentless and methodical in the way that certain lawyers are when they have a case they believe in and documents that hold up under everything the other side throws at them. The unsigned revision turned out to be a significant weapon. Arthur had been right that it was significant, and the other side discovered this when they tried to use it and found that it had no legal force without Earl's signature and considerable legal exposure for the people who had attempted to apply it as though it did. 4 months after the February night, the Hargrove loan against Earl Carter's garage was ruled unenforceable. The debt of $47,000, plus the fees and interest that had accumulated on it, was discharged. The garage was free. Lily was standing in the garage when Arthur called to tell her. She was under a 2019 Road King 1 of 9 motorcycles currently waiting for her attention. Because something had happened to Carter's garage in the month since February, something she was still in the process of understanding. She came out from under the Road King and sat on the floor with the phone to her ear and listened to Arthur explain what the ruling meant in plain language. And when he finished, she said, "Thank you, Arthur," in a voice that was steady and clear. And she ended the call, and she sat on the floor of her grandfather's garage for about 3 minutes without moving. Then she got back under the Road King because there was work to do. There was always work to do. Earl Carter had taught her that the work didn't stop because something good had happened any more than it stopped because something bad had happened. The work was the constant. The work was the thread that ran through everything and kept everything connected. What had happened to Carter's garage in the months since February was partly straightforward and partly something she didn't know how to explain simply. The straightforward part was word had traveled. Within the biker community, which was larger and more connected than most people who were not in it understood the story of what had happened on Route 9 in February had become something people talked about. Not loudly, not in the way that things travel when they are performed or exaggerated. In the way that true things travel when people who care about honesty encounter them, quietly, directly, from one person who knew to another person who needed to know. Bikers came to Carter's garage. They came from towns she'd never been to, from chapters she'd never heard of. On motorcycles she had to learn to work on, from documentation she found herself ordering specifically because of who was showing up. They came because Bear Walker had sent them, and because Frank had sent them, and because Duke had mentioned it to someone, and Remy had mentioned it to someone else, and the mention had gone the way genuine endorsements go when they come from people who have no reason to say something unless it's true. They came because a 19-year-old girl had found 2 score marks on a brake line at midnight in February and had documented them before she touched them and had told the truth about what she found. That was the reputation. Not the story. She was always uncomfortable when people wanted the full story, when they wanted to sit in the garage and hear about the night and what it had meant. She deflected those conversations with the same instinct she had always had about things that were too personal to display. But the reputation was something she could work with. The reputation was, Carter's garage does honest work, and the person running it has no interest in anything other than fixing what's broken and sending you back out on the road safely. Earl Carter had built that reputation for 31 years. She was keeping it. Roy Keller came to see her in April. She had been thinking about what she would say to him for weeks, running through the conversation in her mind, the way she ran through a diagnostic, identifying the components, deciding what order to address them in. She still did not know with certainty whether Roy had been complicit or simply used. Arthur had looked at what they had on Roy specifically and concluded that the evidence placed him in the category of unwitting conduit rather than knowing participant, someone who had passed along Pruitt's offer in genuine belief that it was in. Lily's interest, without understanding the full structure of what he was part of. She chose to believe that. Not because it was comfortable, but because the evidence supported it. And she was a person who followed evidence. Roy Keller walked into the garage on a Saturday afternoon with his hat in his hands, literally in his hands, and his old wool cap turned over and over in his fingers, the way people turn things when they are carrying something they don't know how to put down. He looked older than she remembered. He looked like a man who had spent several months understanding that he had been part of something he would spend the rest of his life wishing he hadn't been part of. Lily, he said. Roy, she said. She was wiping her hands on a rag, and she faced him directly. I owe you an apology, he said. I owe you more than that, but I'll start there. He paused. The cap went around in his hands. I didn't know. I want you to know that I didn't know what Hargrove was doing, who was behind it, what they were part of. I thought it was a legitimate offer, and I thought I told myself I was looking out for you. He stopped. But I used Earl's name to pressure you. I said he would have wanted you to sell. And I don't have any right to speak for what Earl would have wanted. His voice broke slightly on the name. And he was my friend for 40 years. I had no right. And Lily looked at him for a moment. No, she said. You didn't. And he nodded. He deserved that, and he knew it. But you also didn't know, she said. And there's a difference between doing wrong and doing wrong knowingly. And I'm not going to pretend those are the same thing. He looked up at her. This garage is not going anywhere, Roy, she said. And neither am I. So if you still want to be someone my grandfather's granddaughter knows, you can come back in on a Saturday and bring your truck that probably needs an oil change, because it's been long enough, and we can move forward from here. Roy Keller looked at her with an expression that was entirely without pretense old man gratitude, the raw kind, the kind that doesn't bother with dignity, because dignity seems beside the point when someone has given you something you don't fully deserve. All right, he said. All right, Lily, bring the truck next weekend, she said. I'll be here. She turned back to the Road King. He put his hat back on and walked out, and she heard his footsteps on the parking lot, and she heard his car start and pull away, and she kept working. Bear came back in June. He came alone, which was unusual. She had gotten used to him, arriving with at least one other person, Frank or Duke or Remy, the gravitational field of the chapter always present in some form. He came alone on the Heritage Softail, which she heard from 2 blocks away and recognized immediately. The way you recognize the sound of something you worked on intimately, the specific character of an engine you have had your hands inside. He pulled into the lot and cut the engine and sat for a moment before he came in, the way he always did not hesitation. She had learned, but the habit of transition, of completing one thing before beginning the next. He came through the door. He looked at the garage, at the 9 bikes in various states of repair, at the 2 new storage shelves she'd built along the back wall, at the business license renewal she'd framed and hung next to the snap-on clock because she had decided it deserved to be on the wall. You're busy, he said. Getting there, she said. She came out from under the Road King for the 2nd time that day. How's the engine, he said. I took it on a long run last week. 300 miles, he paused. It's the best it's ever run. I told you 1 week for the flywheel replacement. I know, I came to do that. He looked at her, and to see how you're doing. She thought about how to answer that honestly. I'm better than I was, she said. And worse than I probably look, some days. And okay with both of those things, she paused. The discharge ruling was 4 months ago, and I still wake up sometimes thinking about the number. 47,000. It's in my body. It's going to take a while to leave. Yeah, he said. That's how it works. How are you, she said. How is the Tommy situation? Bear was quiet for a moment. Tommy is cooperating fully with the DA's office. His testimony is strong. Patricia Howell says he's going to get a deal, probably probation and restitution, no prison time, given the circumstances and the cooperation. He paused. His wife's treatment is covered under the hospital's assistance program. She's doing better, and you? Lily said, not the case. And you? He looked at the floor for a moment, then at the business license on the wall, and then at her. I'm learning to hold 2 things at the same time, he said. Tommy did something that could have killed me. And Tommy is someone I've known and trusted for 11 years who got into a situation he couldn't see a way out of. Both of those things are true simultaneously. I'm learning to keep them both without letting either one cancel the other out. That sounds like hard work, she said. It is, he said. But it's the right kind of hard. She understood that. She understood it in the way you understand something that lives in the same territory as your own experience, even if the specific geography is different. Get the bike on the lift, she said. I'll do the flywheel replacement today, and it'll take about 3 hours. I've got nowhere to be, he said. Then stay, she said. Duke and Frank are coming by later. I've been promising Duke an introduction to the Road King I'm working on, and he keeps showing up without enough time to do it properly. Bear looked at her, the fractional near smile. You've been keeping up with Duke. Duke has been coming by every other week, she said. He says it's to check on the bikes. He also eats all my crackers and tells stories about being young, and I think that might be the real reason. Bear laughed. It was the first time she had heard him actually laugh. But actual laughter, brief and unguarded, The kind that happens when something catches you before you can prepare for it. And it changed his face entirely. It made him look like someone who had, at one point in his life, laughed easily and who had been working his way back to that point for a while. And Earl Carter would have liked Duke, Bear said. Earl Carter would have argued with Duke constantly and loved every minute of it, Lily said. And get the bike on the lift. He got the bike on the lift. And she started work. The afternoon came through the garage, the way afternoons come through in June, warmly, with the particular quality of light that makes everything look like it's been there for a long time and is going to be there for longer. And the snap-on clock kept its perfect time on the wall. And the sound of her tools filled the space the way her grandfather's tools had filled it for 31 years. And Bear sat on the bench and talked, and she worked and listened. And at some point Frank arrived, and then Duke, and the garage filled up with the sound of people who had chosen each other in the specific and non-negotiable way that people choose each other when they have been through something real together. And Lily worked on the flywheel with her hands and thought about Earl Carter with some part of her mind that was always, even now, even in the good moments, paying quiet attention to the fact of his absence and the weight of what he had left her. Not just the garage, not just the debt he hadn't wanted her to know about, or the clients who had been moved, or the loan she had carried for 8 months without knowing it was a weapon. What he had left her was this: a place where people could come when something was broken, a place where the door stayed open, a place where the work was honest and the work mattered and the person doing it meant it. She meant it. She had meant it every night for 8 months when she came in alone with a flashlight, and she meant it more now, with the lights working and the lift running and 9 motorcycles waiting and the sound of Duke telling a story that was making Frank close his eyes in patient exasperation. She meant it the way Earl Carter had meant it, which was completely and without reservation and with the full weight of everything she was. Garrett Pruitt was convicted on 14 counts 11 months after his arrest. The sentence was substantial. Hargrove Financial Solutions was dissolved by court order. The land corridor, all 23 parcels that had been quietly accumulated toward the highway extension, was unwound through the civil proceedings, and most of the properties were returned to their original owners or their heirs. The county planning official received a prison sentence. 2 members of the assessor's office lost their positions and their pensions. Patricia Howell sent Lily a copy of the final sentencing document. Not because she was required to, she wasn't, but because she thought Lily deserved to see it. Lily read every page. She folded it and put it in the small box under the workbench. Next to the photograph and the brass compass and the note in Earl's handwriting that still said, in the careful block letters that were so recognizably his, the last ordinary thing he had ever written down: "I'm proud of you every single day." She thought about whether he would have been proud of this. She decided he would have been. Not because everything had worked out. Earl Carter had lived long enough to know that things working out was never guaranteed and was not the measure of whether something was worth doing. He would have been proud of the specifics, the photographs taken before the damage was touched, the documents filed and kept. The door opened in the middle of the night for a stranger who needed help. The refusal, through 8 months of math that didn't work, and notices under the socket wrench and crackers for dinner 3 nights in a row, to sign the papers and walk away. He would have been proud of the staying. Carter's garage stayed open. It stayed open that first winter. And it stayed open through the legal proceedings. And it stayed open after the discharge ruling. And it stayed open on the Tuesday in November, when it rained so hard that 3 of the 9 motorcycles waiting for service had to be moved to make room for the water coming under the back door, because the back door seal still needed to be replaced, and Lily had been so busy with actual work that she kept putting it off, which was a problem Earl Carter would have found both completely understandable and mildly exasperating. It stayed open when Lily hired her first employee, a 22-year-old named Daria, who had applied 3 times before Lily finally said yes. Because Daria was persistent, the specific way that the good mechanics are persistent, and the way that says, "I will figure this out regardless," which was the only quality that genuinely could not be taught. It stayed open on the morning Bear Walker came in with 4 members of his chapter and a Sportster that belonged to a kid who had just gotten his license and had no idea what he was riding. And Bear asked Lily if she would walk the kid through the basics. And she spent 2 hours doing exactly that, while Bear sat on the bench with his coffee and watched with the expression she had learned to read as the one that meant he was somewhere between satisfied and moved, and was choosing not to make a production of either. You're good at that, he said when the kid had left, thrilled with the understanding he'd walked out with. Earl taught me that way, she said. You explain it like the person already has the intelligence to understand it. You just have to give them the right words. He was a teacher, Bear said. He was the best teacher I've ever had, she said. And he didn't know it. He thought he was just fixing cars. Bear looked at the clock on the wall. He looked at the business license in the frame. He looked at the garage, at the fully operational, fully lit, fully functional space that had been falling apart around a 19-year-old girl with a flashlight 18 months ago. And his expression had the quality of something completed, something that had been in the process of becoming for a long time and had finally arrived at what it was always going to be. Earl would have liked you, Lily said. She had thought about this for a while and had decided to say it because it was true and because true things deserved to be said directly. Bear looked at her. He would have given you a hard time about the noise your exhaust makes, she said, and told you 3 times that he could fix it, and you'd say you liked it that way, and he'd say that liking something wrong doesn't make it right, and you'd agree and then leave it exactly how it was, and he'd shake his head every time you pulled in. She paused, and then he'd have a cup of coffee ready for you and ask how the road was. Bear said nothing for a moment. Yeah, he said quietly, and I think that's right. The afternoon held. The work continued. Earl Carter's garage stood on Route 9, the way it had stood there for 31 years, opened by a man who believed that doing honest work in service of people who needed it was enough reason to get up every morning, and kept open now by the granddaughter he raised in the same belief. The door was open. The lights were on. The lift worked. The snap-on clock kept perfect time. And the girl who had refused to go down was still standing. Still standing. Still working. Still opening the door, because in Earl Carter's garage, the door was always open. And some things are worth protecting with everything you have. And some fights are worth staying in until they are completely, undeniably, permanently won.